Chapter 520. A few days after Eric rushed to New York, the 65th Academy Awards were held at the Los Angeles Music Center. Schindler's List was unquestionably the biggest winner. It received a total of 12 nominations and won 8 Oscars. Steven Spielberg finally won the Academy Award for Best Director, as he had always wanted. Steven Spielberg had been in the industry for 25 years, ever since he pretended to be an employee of Universal Pictures and entered the studio in Burbank. After that, he had achieved a series of box office results with films such as Jaws, Aliens, and Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. He could be said to be the most successful commercial film director in Hollywood, and enjoyed a very high status in Hollywood. However, now that he was recognized by the Academy of Film, he was so excited that he shed tears on the small podium. Although it was close to midnight in the Eastern Time, the two women accompanied Eric to watch the entire award ceremony. When she noticed Spielberg wiping his tears, Virginia whispered to Eric if he would also be like this when he won the Academy Award in the future. Eric remembered how he felt when he won the Best Adapted Screenplay Award for Smelling Women 2 years ago. At that time, he thought that as a person who had been reborn, he would be indifferent to the award. However, in the atmosphere of the award ceremony, it was almost impossible to remain calm. However, Eric was sure that if he really won the Best Director Oscar in the future, he would definitely be excited, but it was unlikely that he would shed tears like Spielberg, because Spielberg still retained a childish nature in his middle age, while Eric had long lost his childish heart. Last year's Tornado won the Best Visual Special Effects Award without any surprise. Stan Winston was there to receive the award in person. Because Eric and Joanna were absent, and because there were no important nominations, except for a few technical staff for Best Sound and Stan Winston, the main crew members of Tornado did not attend the Oscars this time. It was better for Tornado to win a technical award, but the other nominated films of Firefly Pictures all went back empty-handed. Therefore, intentionally or unintentionally, after the Academy Awards ceremony, in addition to congratulating Spielberg, who had finally achieved success after more than 20 years, many media outlets turned their attention to Firefly. They criticized Firefly's movies for being too commercialized, and even Disney had become mercenary. They only knew how to make profitable commercial movies to earn profits, but they had forgotten to pursue the artistic and social aspects of the movie itself. Eric glanced at these sour articles. After all, the performance of Firefly Pictures last year was too strong. 27% of the total box office in North America was more than the second and third place combined. It was not surprising that the other film companies felt like they were sitting on pins and needles. Thinking of the several films that had already started the summer promotion, Eric thought that after this year, the other 6 would probably be even angrier, but they would definitely get used to this situation sooner or later. After April, Virginia and Joanna were due to give birth. Everyone in the small manor, including Eric, became very cautious, because the two women were pregnant at the same time. Although the possibility of the babies being born at the same time was very low, Eric still prepared 2 identical delivery rooms in the villa. He even prepared 2 teams of doctors for the delivery of the babies. This went on until April 9th, which was supposed to be an ordinary Friday. After Eric had lunch, he went to the study to deal with some documents sent from Los Angeles as usual. Joanna, on the other hand, was sitting beside Eric like a shadow, reading a book in her hand quietly. In the face of media criticism about the excessive commercialization of Firefly Pictures, although Firefly was very indifferent from top to bottom, and did not make a public response no matter what the outside world said, within Firefly, after several discussions, the management agreed that the Oscars were, after all, an important part of Hollywood. Even if it was to maintain a public image, Firefly should not be overly ignored. After a few days of discussion, the management discussed 2 options. One was to set up a dedicated indie film department for Firefly, which would invest a fixed amount or buy a few indie films for Oscars every year. The other plan was to acquire a second or third-tier film company that specialized in indie films. Moreover, Michael Lynn and others even had a target, Miramax. Eric was not surprised to see this name. A few years ago, Miramax was only involved in some peripheral awards such as Best Foreign Language Film. However, in recent years, as the Wayne brothers became more and more experienced in award public relations, almost every year they tried to get their hands on the core Oscars such as Best Film, Best Director, Best Actor and Best Actress. And this year, although Miramax was facing losses due to the excessive expansion of the production and distribution business, and had to choose the road of sale, The Crying Game still brought Miramax 3 heavyweight Oscars nominations for Best Film, Best Director and Best Actor. If it were not for Schindler's List, it would not be impossible for The Crying Game to win 1 or 2 of these awards. However, looking at the document in his hand, Eric was no longer interested in acquiring Miramax. Perhaps because of the comments in the media during this period, the Wayne brothers thought that Firefly's intention to acquire Miramax was more urgent than the other competitors. Therefore, they offered a price of $100 million, hoping to retain a certain amount of shares and maintain Miramax's independent operation. A few years ago, the reason why Eric chose New Line and Miramax as the acquisition targets to expand Firefly was mainly because the 2 film companies already had relatively mature distribution channels. Although the scale was very small, as long as there were good movies, they could expand very quickly. In the end, he chose New Line, mainly because New Line's scale was larger. Now, Eric didn't have the same thoughts about Miramax. After seeing the conditions proposed by the Wayne brothers, he was even less interested. If after acquiring Miramax, he still let the Wayne brothers operate this film company alone. The 2 brothers were not satisfied with only making Academy Award-winning films and wholeheartedly wanted to expand Miramax. In the future, Firefly and Miramax would definitely repeat the mistakes of Disney and Miramax. A separation was almost inevitable. Eric didn't intend to pull the 2 brothers with their own thoughts into the Disney system and make things difficult for him. After thinking about it, Eric decided to use the first set of plans. After making up his mind, Eric turned on the computer and began to type his opinions on the blank document. Just as he typed a few lines of words, someone suddenly knocked on the study door. Eric frowned. Before he could respond, a maid pushed the door open and poked her head in. She said anxiously, "Mr. Williams, Madam's water broke." Eric suddenly stood up. "Did you call the doctor?" Madam just felt a little uncomfortable in her stomach. Ms. Paquin just came to check on her. Madam is now in the delivery room. Eric turned around the desk and was about to walk out. After taking a few steps, he turned his head and looked at Joanna. "Joan, did you?" Joanna closed the book and stood up with a smile. "How can there be such a coincidence? Don't worry about me. Go and have a look. Then you have a good rest here. You don't have to go," Eric said and followed the maid out. After passing through the long corridor, they came to a room facing south at the other end of the villa. Eric had already heard Virginia's cry of pain from outside. Just as he was about to push the door open, a nurse came out of another room with a tray. Seeing Eric's action, she quickly stopped him. "Mr. Williams, you can't go in like this. You have to put on sterile clothes first. Mary, help Mr. Williams get his clothes." Eric agreed. He hurriedly changed his clothes and finally walked into the delivery room. This refurbished delivery room was definitely not inferior to any high-end ward in any hospital. All the equipment was brand new. When Eric promised the private doctor in charge of the 2 women that he would donate all the equipment in the delivery room to him after using them, the doctor was so excited that he almost forgot himself. Virginia, who was lying on the hospital bed, saw Eric and immediately reached out her small hand. "Eric. I'm here." Eric stepped forward and held the woman's small hand. He comforted her for a while before looking at the middle-aged woman wearing a mask beside him. "Ms. Paquin, how is the situation?" "Don't worry, Mr. Williams. I'm here. There won't be any problems. Eliza will come over later too." The Eliza mentioned by the middle-aged woman was a doctor from another team. Eric nodded. Looking at the busy doctor and nurse, he did not disturb them and quietly stayed by Virginia's side. A woman's first child always took a long time. Eric was originally prepared for this matter. However, Virginia's water broke in the afternoon, and it was tormented until early in the morning. The little guy was unwilling to come out. Virginia, who was a little pale, Heard Eric discussing with the doctor in a low voice that once 12 hours passed and the little guy did not move, they would perform a cesarean section. She immediately cried out in a low voice, "Eric, I don't want a cesarean section. I heard that the child will become stupid." "Don't talk nonsense. How can it become stupid? Lie down properly." Eric sat down next to the woman again, held her hand, and comforted her in a low voice. I will. Anyway, I don't want a cesarean section," Eric said with a little helplessness. "Then you have to work harder and let the little guy come out quickly." "It hurts." "Then a cesarean section." "Boo-hoo. It's all your fault." Yes. It's my fault. Don't cry. Relax. I'm hungry. There's porridge in the kitchen. I'll get it for you," Eric said and hurried out of the delivery room. The hostess was in labor, and no one was resting. The whole villa was brightly lit. Eric passed by the living room. Joanna was sitting on the sofa with a maid and whispering something. Seeing Eric come out, Joanna quickly asked, "Eric, how is it?" Eric shook his head. Dr. Parquin said that if there's still no movement after 12 hours, it's better to perform a cesarean section. "I'll get some food for Vicky. Joan, you should go to bed early." "It's okay. I can't sleep either." Joanna shook her head gently and stroked her abdomen. Perhaps it was because of Virginia. She felt a slight pain in her abdomen. However, she just treated it as a normal phenomenon many times in the past. In order not to worry Eric, she did not say it out loud. She continued, "Gina just asked if you want to eat. Go to the kitchen and get it." Seeing Eric go into the kitchen and quickly come out with a bowl, the maid beside Joanna said softly, "Mr. Williams is so considerate." "Yes," Joanna said softly. She felt a sharp pain in her abdomen again. She frowned slightly and reached for the remote control next to her. She wanted to turn on the TV to distract herself. She moved her body slightly and touched the remote control. At the same time, she saw a light water stain on the sofa. The maid was about to say something, but when she followed Joanna's gaze, she suddenly covered her mouth and shouted, "Oh my God!" After saying this, the maid got up and ran nervously to the delivery room. Joanna's water broke. Eric was almost at a loss when he heard the news. However, the doctors calmly divided into two small teams, one on each side. To be on the safe side, Dr. Parquin suggested that Eric could contact one or two more doctors. Encountering such a coincidence, Eric didn't care about confidentiality at all, and immediately agreed to the doctor's suggestion. Seeing that Eric agreed, Dr. Parquin recommended two of his colleagues to Eric. The nearby residents had already noticed the brightly lit manor. After the two helicopters flew and landed in the small manor, they became even more curious. Some people even enthusiastically came over to ask, but they didn't get an answer from the guards. Eric briefly talked with the doctor who had just arrived by helicopter, and was a little surprised to see him. Then he went into Joanna's delivery room. Seeing Eric coming over, Joanna, who was biting her lips slightly, immediately reached out her small hand to him. Seeing the man holding her small hand and comforting her softly, Joanna, who had been quiet all this time, couldn't help but cry. "Eric! It's okay. It'll be over soon. Don't worry." Eric comforted her, and reached out to wipe the corner of Joanna's eyes. Joanna shook her head gently and said sadly and timidly, "No, Eric, I mean my child is not called Hawaii." Chapter 521. Eric was puzzled. It took him a while to realize that this was the name that he had given to the baby in Joanna's belly. At that time, he thought of a certain skit and came up with this name. It was originally a joke. After the discussion that day, Eric didn't mention this to the two women again. He didn't expect that Joanna would keep it in her heart. Moreover, the woman was obviously very dissatisfied with this nonsense name. She couldn't help but say it out loud now. Although Eric didn't know whether to laugh or cry, he still followed Joanna's tone and said, "Okay, not Hawaii. You can name the baby whatever you like. I won't interfere." Joanna smiled and nodded as if a big stone had been lifted from her heart. After thinking for a while, she looked at Eric and whispered, "Hawaii. Hawaii doesn't sound good." "Yeah, it's too bad. It's all my fault. When the baby is born, You can slowly give it a good name. Eric nodded and said. He and the two women didn't pay special attention to the gender of the baby. Until now they had only used it as a substitute. Although Joanna wasn't sick, her quiet personality made Eric subconsciously feel that she would definitely take much longer to give birth than Virginia. Eric was prepared to not rest for a long time. However, to Eric's surprise, only a little more than 4 hours later, the baby's clear cry came from Joanna's side. Congratulations, Mr. Williams. It's a cute little princess. Eric heard the news and just walked out from Virginia's side. A nurse said to Eric, Thank you, you've worked hard. Eric thanked her and opened the door to enter Joanna's room. Joanna had been moved to the trauma room. She looked very weak, but she didn't sleep. Instead, she stared at the nurse who was giving the baby a warm bath. After a while, the nurse washed the baby, wrapped it and sent it to Joanna's side. Eric, this is my daughter. Joanna looked sideways at the baby's wrinkled face and said softly. Eric squatted down beside the wound and said with a smile, It's our daughter. Yes, our daughter. Joanna also revealed a faint smile. She reached out her finger and gently touched the baby's face before carefully retracting it. A hint of hesitation flashed in her eyes, but she quickly looked up at Eric and said, Eric, let's call this little guy Hawaii. Eric opened his mouth, then smiled and said, Forget it. When I came up with this name, I didn't put in much effort, and you don't like it. No. Joanna shook her head gently and said with certainty, It's called Hawaii Williams. Eric couldn't guess the woman's mind, so he nodded. Well, as I said just now, you decide the name of the little guy. Joanna nodded and whispered in front of the little girl. Then she asked Eric, Hawaii, what should we call it? Eric thought for a while and said according to the pronunciation of his mother tongue from his previous life, Xiaxia, what do you think? Joanna heard that Eric's pronunciation had nothing to do with the word Hawaii, so she asked, Does this nickname have anything to do with Hawaii? Eric explained, Of course, according to the pronunciation of English, the nickname should be Haha, but I prefer the pronunciation of another language, Xiaxia. This name means summer. Summer represents vitality and blooming. Joanna didn't ask which language Eric was speaking. She repeated the nickname a few times and said with satisfaction, Xiaxia, very good. Let's call her Xiaxia. By the way, how's Vicky? There are so many doctors here, so she should be fine. But you know, most women take a long time to give birth for the first time, Eric said. Joanna nodded. Well, you should go over there and take care of her. Eric didn't refuse. He was also worried about the other side. He got up and said, I'll get someone to bring you something to eat. Then go to bed early. I know. Hurry up and go. Eric quickly went to another room. Virginia looked a little sad at this time. She originally thought that her child would be Eric's eldest son or daughter. She didn't expect it to become a younger brother or sister in the blink of an eye. Because 12 hours had passed, the baby was likely to be in unknown danger due to lack of oxygen if it was delayed any longer. The doctors were already preparing for a cesarean section, and Virginia didn't object at this time. However, perhaps feeling that his mother was going to be stabbed, the little guy, who had been quiet for a long time, finally decided to come out. The doctors had a simple discussion and canceled the operation plan. More than 2 hours later, a chubby boy came into this world crying. Because the two little guys were born at the same time, the commotion was too big. Although several confidentiality contracts were added afterward, some information was inevitably leaked. However, because there were no photos or witnesses, only some tabloids attracted the attention of gossip lovers with specious headlines, such as the birth of a Hollywood director's illegitimate child. The more credible large media outlets didn't rashly release the news. Most ordinary people who saw the news even just regarded it as another groundless Hollywood gossip. However, the ordinary people's sense of smell wasn't sharp enough, but it didn't mean that the media would be slow to react. In just a few days, the originally deserted East Hampton gradually gathered reporters from North America, and even Europe. They easily found the small manor that Eric bought and waited. The small manor had long been empty. These people waited for several days, but of course they didn't find anything. At this time, Eric had once again taken the two women to another place. This time it was a farm that Eric borrowed, and the owner of the farm was Spielberg, who had just won the Oscar for Best Director. Magnificent Farm was the summer residence of Spielberg's family, but under normal circumstances, he still lived in Los Angeles. The two little guys had just been born and weren't suitable for long-distance travel. Buying or renting a place to live was also not something that could be done in a short period of time. Eric just happened to know that Spielberg had a manor in East Hampton, so he called him. After hearing Eric's reason, Spielberg readily lent the farm to Eric. The two little guys had been born for 7 days, and the two well-prepared mothers had arranged everything in an orderly manner. In addition, there were a few nannies watching over them, so Eric basically couldn't do anything. The day before yesterday, Eric enthusiastically changed his son's diaper. For some reason, the little guy started crying inexplicably, so Eric was kicked out of the baby's room by Virginia and ordered to not get close to her precious babies. Of course, this ban was just a joke, but the two mothers no longer asked Eric to help with anything. Eric suddenly became the most idle person in the manor. Before the children were born, Eric wasn't in the mood to do anything else. Now that the two little guys were born smoothly, Eric was relieved and started his work. In addition to the work documents that would be sent over from Los Angeles as usual, Eric began to write the setting for Charlie's Angels. In addition, another thing came from Chris. The beta version of Hotmail was finally online, and Eric personally used it. Although he was a little annoyed by the guy named Steve Mitnick, after using this email service, Eric was very satisfied. Due to various restrictions, many websites now had some lag, and many times there were problems such as loading difficulties. However, these problems were basically not seen on Hotmail, and all the email functions were very smooth. After using it, Eric immediately began to take the initiative to spread this communication method to the people around him. The management of Firefly was the first to accept this online email tool. Katzenberg and others now sent a few emails to Eric every day to discuss problems. At the same time, the Hotmail tool also began to be promoted through the eye-catching interface on Yahoo's homepage. Yahoo and IE now covered more than 90% of the internet users. Therefore, in just 3 days after the launch of Hotmail, people realized the convenience of this communication tool. In addition to the free nature of Hotmail's email, the registered users exceeded 1 million. Fortunately, Hotmail was well prepared and did not cause an outage due to excessive server load. However, according to the current speed of user expansion, perhaps within a month, Hotmail's coverage could reach the same level as Yahoo and IE. Chris was originally a little worried about the operating prospects of the three companies. After all, if the continuous free strategy was not profitable, no one could operate the company for a long time. Not to mention, with the explosion of the number of users, the operating costs would continue to increase. In the future, even Eric would not be able to bear the cost of only investing and not producing. However, seeing the expansion of Hotmail's user base, Chris quickly relaxed. Even if Hotmail's user base only reached 10 million in the future, with advertising and other operating methods, they could still make a good profit. Not to mention, with tens of millions of users, they could certainly continue to develop other ways to make money on the internet. At the same time as Hotmail was the new official version of IE. Previously, IE had been a beta version. The launch of the official version of IE also meant that the browser's technology had completely matured. It was almost impossible for other computer companies to surpass IE's technological advantage in a short period of time. Sitting by the empty swimming pool, Eric crossed his legs. There was a laptop on the round table. While thinking about these things, his fingers kept tapping on the keyboard. From time to time, he picked up the coffee next to him and took a few sips. He looked relaxed and comfortable. The child was successfully born. Virginia and Joanna both hinted that if Eric was busy, he could return to Los Angeles as soon as possible. There was no need to accompany them here. However, Eric himself was not in a hurry to return to Los Angeles. When he was in Los Angeles, he was so busy that his feet never touched the ground. Now that he had left Los Angeles for more than half a month, there seemed to be no signs of chaos there. As the boss, of course, he had to be lazy. The laptop made a soft beeping sound. Eric skillfully opened the browser and logged into the mailbox. Although Hotmail had not launched a dedicated client yet, it could install a plugin in IE to prompt for sending and receiving messages. Other than a few women and close friends, the only people who knew Eric's personal email address were the executives of Firefly Pictures. Although only the executives above the level of department head could get Eric's personal email address, there were still a lot of people who knew about it. Although Eric seemed to have reminded them not to email him unless it was something important, he still received a lot of messages every day. Some people even snitched to Eric, which made him speechless. This was a work email from Jerry Bruckheimer. It was now less than 2 months before the release of Jurassic Park, and the film had entered the final intensive promotion period. The promotion and distribution of the film were mainly jointly handled by the distribution department of Firefly and the producer, Jerry Bruckheimer. Eric was reading the document when Joanna walked over with a pot of coffee with a smile. "I think you should be almost out of coffee, so I made you a new one." Joanna waved her hand, stepped over a few data cables on the ground, and walked to Eric's side. She filled Eric's cup with coffee and pulled a chair over to sit beside Eric. "Is Xiaoxiao asleep?" Eric asked casually. "Yes, sleepy little girl," Joanna said happily. She casually glanced at Eric's laptop screen and inadvertently noticed some sentences. She could not help but blink. Eric did not intend to hide anything. He pointed to the email on the screen and said, "Yesterday at a promotional event in Seattle, a newspaper reporter asked me on the spot why I didn't participate in the promotion of Jurassic Park." At that time, Jerry led the team. He wanted to change the topic, but then another reporter boldly asked if I had an illegitimate child. These people are getting bolder and bolder. In the email, Jerry Bruckheimer simply described the episode that happened in Seattle yesterday, but he also expressed his concern in the email. Jurassic Park was about to be released, and many people in the circle more or less knew that Eric had a child. Bruckheimer was worried that before the movie was released, some people would make a fuss about it. Chapter 522. What are you going to do? Joanna asked Eric after reading the email carefully. Eric smiled and said, "Actually, it's not a big deal. I've always been single." Joanna blinked her slender eyes a few more times, and she more or less understood. Eric was not married, so it was not a big deal to have a child in advance. At most, he would be criticized by some conservative people. With his current power and fame, it would not cause any substantial harm to him. Then, what about the movie? Will it really affect it? Joanna pointed at the email. Eric smiled and patted Joanna's hand. "Don't worry, it won't affect it too much. You don't have to worry about these things. Just focus on taking care of the little girl. If you're bored and want to work, I can arrange 1 or 2 movies for you. Or you can do other things that you want to do. Haven't you been talking to Emily about fashion recently? Are you interested in designers?" Joanna shook her head. She held Eric's arm and leaned on him gently. She said, "I'm just chatting with Emily. I'm not like you. I only know how to act and nothing else." "Then forget it. If you want to do anything, just tell me." "Okay," Joanna replied in a low voice. After a moment of silence, she said, "Eric, I told my parents about Xiaoxia's birth." Eric turned to look at the woman. "What did they say?" "They didn't say much. They just hope that I can live a better life." Eric held Joanna's hand and said, "I promise you and Xiaoxia that you will live a good life." "I know." Joanna nodded and said, "There's one more thing." "What?" My little sister plans to come to America. My parents hope that I can take care of her." Eric was a little confused. It was the first time that he heard Joanna mention that she had a little sister. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't think it was necessary to tell you." Joanna looked at Eric and said, "Her name is Eva. Eva Pakula. She's 1 year younger than you." She was 1 year younger than him, which meant that Eva Pakula was only 22 years old. Eric thought for a moment and asked subconsciously, "Is Eva as pretty as you?" As soon as he said that, Eric felt his arm being pinched by Joanna. He immediately rubbed his arm and cried out in pain. Joanna released her fingers and glared at Eric, but she still said softly, "Of all the people who know us, Eva is the one who looks the most like me, especially her eyes." This time, Eric did not dare to talk nonsense. He nodded in agreement. Good eyes, good eyes. Your eyes are the prettiest. So, what is Eva doing in America? Can I help? I wanted to ask for your help, but forget it. I'll tell Eva to stay away from you, Joanna said bluntly. Eric immediately put on a fawning smile. All right, you can arrange it yourself. I won't interfere. Well, if you need help, you can ask someone else. Just tell them that I asked. Joanna nodded and sighed. She said, Eva wanted to come over a few years ago, but I insisted that she finish her university in Poland. Eric asked, what is her major? English, Joanna said. She then looked at Eric. Her English is more standard than mine. She doesn't speak that weird accent that you like. In order to film Tornado, Joanna had gone through a long period of language training to get rid of her accent. However, after filming Tornado, Joanna's accent returned. It was a kind of English that Eric could not describe clearly. It did sound weird, but Eric inexplicably liked Joanna's pronunciation. As the two of them were talking, Eric's mobile phone rang. When he picked up the phone, a female voice came from the other side. Hello, is this Mr. Williams? This mobile phone was a new number that Eric had gotten when he came to New York. Not many people knew it. Hearing the familiar yet strange female voice, Eric asked in confusion, Yes, it's me. Who is this? Mr. Williams, I'm Michelle Simmons. I just came back from Europe. Mr. Fissman picked up your original number. He told me that I could use this number to contact you. Eric immediately thought of her. He said, Michelle, did your trip to Europe go well? Yes, Mr. Williams. I've already found a few talented actresses according to your request. They are now in Los Angeles with me. I want to ask you, if you can arrange to meet them? Eric thought for a moment and said, How about this? Fax me their information first. I'll take a look first. You take down their numbers. Michelle Simmons seemed to know something, so she didn't object. She said, Wait a moment. I'll get a pen. After a while, Michelle Simmons took down the fax number and hung up. Seeing Eric hang up, Joanna asked, Is there something urgent in Los Angeles that you need to deal with? Eric shook his head and smiled. No, don't worry. I said that I would try my best to stay here with you for a while. Joanna smiled and stood up. I just wanted to hear about the fax. Shall I get it for you? Well, it might take a while, Eric said. After Joanna left, Eric looked at the email on the computer screen. He thought for a while and replied to Jerry Bruckheimer. Then he closed the browser and started to work on the story setting of Charlie's Angels. After waiting for more than half an hour, Joanna didn't come back. Instead, Virginia came out with a stack of fax numbers. Hey, there are so many beauties. What are you going to do? Eric smiled and picked up the documents. Didn't I tell you that I'm going to change Charlie's Angels and make a female action movie? Virginia sat down on the chair that Joanna had just sat in. She took a few sips of Eric's coffee and asked, Your next movie? Eric looked at the documents in his hand. He didn't realize the deeper meaning of Virginia's words. He nodded casually and said, Yes, my next movie. Virginia immediately pulled a long face and said, No matter how I look at it, I feel that you're going to mess around with the female lead under the guise of a movie. Charlie's Angels, humph, I've seen it. It's just three little bitches who show off their bodies. Eric finally understood that Virginia thought that he would personally direct Charlie's Angels. Looking at the woman's angry face, he wasn't angry. He just felt that the gentle woman had become a hot mother after giving birth. It wasn't that her body had become hotter, but that her temper had become hotter. He pushed a part of the story setting to Virginia and said, This is a very serious job. I'm only going to write the script. I don't intend to direct it myself. Virginia used the mouse to drag the document to the top. After reading a few paragraphs, she pulled the notebook towards her with interest. Seeing the woman's action, Eric took the stack of actress information from Michelle Simmons and moved it to the side. He flipped through it again. After a while, Eric's eyes stopped on an actress information. At this time, Virginia suddenly said, Eric, Jill Monroe, the genius girl with a high IQ, and Sabrina Wales, the female lead settings are okay. However, I think the setting of Kelly Garrett's character is a bit far-fetched. I've also seen Bruce Lee's action movies and know that kung fu is very powerful. However, Kelly Garrett's parents died in an accident when she was 6 years old. She was adopted by an old Chinese man who opened a martial arts dojo in Chinatown. Then, she learned very powerful kung fu. This won't work. Does Kelly Garrett have no other relatives? Even if she doesn't have any other relatives, according to the federal adoption law, it's impossible for her to be adopted by an old Chinese man. A lot of reasons don't make sense. Eric listened to Virginia's nagging and smiled slightly. These were just the settings he came up with in his mind. He would definitely make a lot of changes in the future. However, after looking at the information in his hand, Eric smiled and said, "Since it won't work, then let's change it. Maybe we can let the girl have a Chinese grandfather who knows kung fu. That would be reasonable. What do you think?" Virginia looked at Eric. "A Chinese grandfather who knows kung fu?" Eric smiled and said, "Yes, I happen to have the information of an actress here. She's a quarter Chinese. She's very suitable." As he spoke, Eric jumped out and placed the information of the actress on the round table. Virginia picked it up and saw the picture of the elegant and cool girl. Then her eyes fell on the girl's basic information and softly spelled out the girl's name. Kate Beckinsale. Eric had a smile on his face. The role of Kate Garrett in Whopper Charming Baby was the martial arts role that Eric had set for the Angel Group. Then, who was more suitable than Kate Beckinsale, who had the title of Hollywood's Violent Barbie in his previous life? At this time, Virginia was beside Eric and exclaimed, "Wow, a top student from Oxford University. No, according to her age, she should be in her second year now. Since she came to Hollywood, she probably can't continue her studies." Alright, don't dislike the top student just because you don't have the talent for learning. Eric took the information from Virginia's hand. Virginia didn't mind. She smiled and said, "Don't you think I don't know? Your other little beauty, Jennifer Connelly, just got her degree from Stanford." Eric retorted, "You have to have the ability to get into Stan University first. Do you have it?" "I don't care." Virginia got up indifferently and asked, "What do you want to eat tonight?" "I'll eat whatever my son eats. Is that okay?" "Bah, I'll starve you to death." Virginia blushed and rolled her eyes at Eric before leaving. Eric smiled and shrugged. He turned his gaze back to the information in his hand. Michelle Simmons didn't find many candidates, only 8. Although the information was very detailed, it didn't take long for him to finish reading it. Eric originally thought that he wouldn't meet any acquaintances, but when he flipped to the last page, a familiar picture of a Latin girl with a wild aura appeared before him. Penelope Cruz. Eric raised his eyebrows in surprise. He looked up and took the notebook to look at the character settings of the other angel, Sabrina Wales. Although it was a little different from the image in his memory, when he thought about it carefully, Penelope Cruz's temperament and image were very compatible with the character of Sabrina Wales. As for the last intelligent character, Jill Monroe, it naturally belonged to Charlize Theron, who had already signed the contract. Eric did not think too much. He picked up the mobile phone next to him, opened the contact list from the laptop, found Michelle Simmons' contact, and dialed. The call was quickly connected. Michelle Simmons was surprised to hear Eric's voice, but she still asked, "Mr. Williams, I've already sent the information over. Have you seen it?" "Yes." Eric looked at the 2 pieces of information on the round table in front of him and said, "Kate Beckinsale and Penelope Cruz. These 2 actresses. Is there any other information about them other than the information I have?" Michelle Simmons paused for a moment, as if she was looking for something. She quickly said, "Most of the information about them has been sent over. Penelope Cruz's resume is very complete. She made her debut in Biggs Luna's Ham last year. Ham won the Silver Lion at the Venice Film Festival last year. Penelope Cruz's performance also won the recognition of many judges. As for Kate Beckinsale, although she only had a few cameo roles, she participated in a strong cast of Shakespeare's comedy Much Ado About Nothing last year. The movie will be released next month." The male and female leads are Kenneth Branagh, who won the Oscar for Best Actor 3 years ago, and Emma Thompson, who won the Oscar for Best Actress this year. In addition, the popular Michael Keaton, Keanu Reeves, and others also participated. The production company is aiming for next year's Oscar for Best Actor, so the production should be very good. To be able to participate in such a movie, this girl must be quite capable. I also had an audition for her when I was in England. Chapter 523. Eric also remembered some information about Much Ado About Nothing. Since this movie was aiming for the Oscars, it seemed that the first movie had gone the wrong way. He wondered who came up with the idea of releasing it in May. If it was released now and did not cause too much of an impact, then the popularity of the movie during the annual awards season should have dissipated. Eric guessed that the production company wanted to take advantage of the hot summer season to recover some of the box office. However, he did not think of any connection between this movie and the Oscars. He guessed that the movie did not make a splash in the box office and did not win any awards. However, these were not Eric's concerns. After Michelle Simmons finished speaking, Eric stood up and thought for a moment. He said, "How about this? I will send you some screenplays later. You can let the two of them record some auditions and send the videotapes to me." Although Michelle Simmons realized that Eric thought highly of the two actresses, she still asked, "Mr. Williams, I brought back a total of 8 girls. I think that maybe they can all participate in an audition." When Eric heard Michelle Simmons' hesitant tone, he immediately realized her difficulties. The girls that Michelle Simmons brought back must have been entrusted to her by acquaintances in the film industry in Europe. If they came all the way to Los Angeles and did not even participate in an audition, then Michelle Simmons would be in a difficult position. Okay, let them all participate in the audition. "Mr. Williams, maybe I can bring them to New York and you can see for yourself?" Michelle Simmons made another suggestion. Eric was stunned and smiled. "Michelle, you should know about my recent situation. It's not convenient for me to show up. You can handle this. Also, you can find Drew to arrange the audition. She will be in charge of the production of Whimsical Beauty in the future. You can get familiar with her in advance." "Okay, I got it." Michelle Simmons did not say anything more. After chatting for a while, she hung up. 2 days later, a group of girls' audition tapes were sent to Eric. Eric spent a few hours watching the tapes, but he didn't see any talented girls with amazing acting skills. He then sent his original decision to Michelle Simmons, who was far away in Los Angeles. After that, through John Woo's introduction, Firefly found the martial arts instructor of the Yuan family troupe from the other side of the ocean, who was responsible for training the 3 women. Time always flew by. In the blink of an eye, it was late May. All the summer movies had entered the final promotional period. Although the main promotional force of Jurassic Park was the actors in the movie, it was too much for the director, Eric, to not attend any events during the whole promotional process. At least, that was what Jeffrey and the others thought. In a phone call, Jerry Bruckheimer complained that Eric should have attended most of the promotional events. He also jokingly asked Eric to give him a raise. For 2 months, Eric basically only contacted the outside world through phone calls and emails. He even rarely went out. People often came to visit, but everyone knew Eric's scruples. They were very careful when they came to visit. Besides, the original small manor was empty. The paparazzi all thought that Eric had left Changdao with the women. Therefore, Eric's residence was never photographed by the paparazzi. However, as the release date of Jurassic Park was getting closer and closer, Eric had to rush back to Los Angeles to preside over the final stage of the movie's promotion. Moreover, it was impossible for Eric, the director, to miss the movie's premiere. Peter Guber got out of the car and walked all the way into the headquarters of Firefly Pictures with his assistant. After the front desk announced his arrival, he quickly walked into the elevator and went all the way to Eric's office on the top floor. After greeting the assistant outside Eric's office, he knocked on the door and pushed open the door of Eric's office. Seeing the young man sitting behind the desk, Peter Guber walked over with a smile as if he had seen his own family. "Eric, you are finally back." Eric smiled at Peter Guber and hurriedly said a few words on the phone. Then he got up and said with a smile, "Peter, I have heard what you just said more than 100 times in the past 2 days. Haha, that shows how much everyone misses you. By the way, have you received my gifts for the little guys? Peter Goober hugged Eric and asked. Of course, thank you. They like it very much. Let's sit over there. Eric pointed to the guest sofa and pressed the phone to ask the secretary to help make coffee. Then he sat down on the sofa with Peter Goober. After the secretary served the coffee and left the office, Peter Goober couldn't wait to say, Eric, the global release of Mr. and Mrs. Smith is about to end. We really can't wait any longer. When you left, you told me that you would consider our next few movie projects. Of course, Peter, I have always kept this matter in mind. Eric picked up the coffee, blew it gently and said, Don't worry, try the coffee first. Peter Goober had already lost his temper because of Eric's delay. He could only pick up the coffee and pretend to take a few sips. Soon he put down the coffee cup again. Eric, I heard that you are now preparing the movie version of Charlie's Angel. If you don't have any other projects for the time being, I think this movie is fine. You know, we still have a contract for 4 movies, but there are less than 2 years left. When Eric heard Peter Goober say this, he put down the coffee cup and said, Peter, Charlie's Angel definitely won't work. I have other plans for this movie. Peter Goober was just testing the waters. When he saw that Eric didn't agree, he said, Then how about getting Wu to prepare the sequel to Mr. and Mrs. Smith immediately? We can't do nothing, right? Don't worry, Peter. Wait a moment, Eric said. He got up and took out a folder from the filing cabinet. He walked over and handed it to him. I said that I would keep this matter in mind. Look, I have already found the project. Peter Goober saw that things had finally taken shape. He couldn't wait to open the folder that Eric handed over. Game of the Brave, what genre is this? Peter Goober asked as he flipped through the information. After just a few pages, he didn't know what to say. This is a 1981 children's literature work. Oh, why didn't I know that there was such a work in Columbia's copyright library? When Eric heard Peter Goober say this, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. This guy was thinking about getting benefits from Columbia all day long. He didn't have time to pay attention to this kind of thing. Game of the Brave was a 1981 work by the famous American children's literature writer, Chris Osberg. It was about a magical board game similar to Monopoly. This board could summon various characters and animals from another time and space, which led to a series of magical stories. A few years after the novel was released, Columbia Pictures bought the movie adaptation rights. However, because the movie needed a lot of special effects, and Columbia Pictures' business was not very good at that time. In addition, the special effects technology was very immature. The management dared not risk spending a lot of money to make such a movie, so the copyright had been shelved. When Peter Goober urged Eric more than 2 months ago, Eric asked for their copyright reserves from Columbia, so he found the adaptation rights of this novel. Together with Game of the Brave, he found the adaptation rights of another comic. Looking at Peter Goober flipping through slowly, Eric said directly, Peter, this is just the first project. There is another one below. Another one? Peter Goober flipped down in surprise and soon found the name of another movie. Man in Black. I seem to have heard of this. This is a comic 2 years ago. I didn't expect. At this point, Peter Goober's expression finally showed a trace of embarrassment. I didn't expect that the copyright of this comic is also with Columbia. Eric didn't urge Peter Goober this time. He let the other party read the information slowly and said, Peter, according to the agreement we signed, the copyright of the 5 movies is shared by both parties. So if you want to make 2 projects, you need to sign a copyright sharing agreement in advance. Peter Goober was stunned. The adaptation rights of these 2 works were solely owned by Columbia Pictures. According to the original agreement, the copyright would become Fireflies in the blink of an eye. And if there were no sequels in a few years, Columbia's copyright would even automatically return to Firefly. No matter how he thought about it, he was at a disadvantage. This made Peter Goober very unhappy. Looking up at Eric, who picked up the coffee again and drank it slowly, Peter Goober had the idea of ignoring Firefly and making these 2 movies alone. However, this idea only flashed in his mind. Soon Peter Goober was a little discouraged. In the information he just saw, these 2 movies were projects with special effects taking a large proportion. One was full of monsters and beasts running rampant everywhere, and the other was full of aliens. If he ignored Firefly, then the digital domain was likely not to participate in the special effects production of these two movies. It was not so easy to find a special effects company with enough technical strength to make these two movies in Hollywood. Even Industrial Light and Magic, which was outstanding a few years ago, might not be able to play. In the past 2 years, everyone in Hollywood knew that because of the rise of the digital domain, Industrial Light and Magic had begun to decline. Especially in the field of computer CG, Industrial Light and Magic was left behind by the digital domain by a few streets. Moreover, if he got rid of Firefly, Eric would definitely not give any guidance to these two projects. Then, it was not certain whether they would succeed or not. Cutthroat Island's box office failure, which was recorded in the Guinness World Records, was still a topic that many people in Hollywood were talking about. Although Eric pretended to be indifferent, he had been paying attention to the changes in Peter Guber's expression from the corner of his eye. Seeing Peter Guber's expression gradually relaxed, Eric said at the right time, "Peter, the copyright of Mr. and Mrs. Smith could have been owned by Firefly alone, but I still did not hesitate to take it out. Furthermore, if you can give Sony HQ a good financial report like last quarter, your position will be more stable. I believe Sony HQ will not be bothered by these small details." Feng Yu said, "Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Smith." Peter Guber knew that Columbia would definitely suffer this loss. However, when he heard Eric's words, Peter Guber also reacted. Anyway, these losses would eventually fall on the Japanese. When he was hired, Sony's headquarters set up a reward fund with a total amount of $50 million US. Because of the excellent results of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Sony's headquarters redeemed a part of the reward. As long as the next movie could still achieve good results, then in the next few years, Peter Guber could continue to redeem these rewards. In addition, he had secretly reaped a lot of benefits from Columbia. Even if he left Columbia in a few years, he could almost rely on these savings to retire early and enjoy his life. As for what would happen to Columbia, it had nothing to do with him. "Okay, Eric, I will arrange for someone to discuss the relevant contract as soon as possible. However, it is already the end of May. According to the fastest production progress, these two movies should be released in the summer next year. In that case, we will not have any movies to cooperate with this year." Eric saw that the copyrights of Game of the Brave and Men in Black were in his hands, and he knew that he should return the favor. He said quickly, "In that case, let John Woo make another gunfight movie. I will personally take care of this. You know, Hong Kong directors have always been very fast in producing movies. Coupled with the non-special effects film, there should be no problem releasing it at the end of the year." Eric happened to remember John Woo's most successful movies in Hollywood. Hearing Eric say this, Peter Guber grinned and said, "Since the 3 movies have been confirmed, Eric, why don't you take this opportunity to finalize the last movie as well? Firefly has so many incubating projects. It's not a big deal to give up one. Also, if all 4 movies are confirmed, then I can immediately announce it to the public. This can also give investors some confidence." Eric didn't think of a suitable movie for a while. The projects in the Firefly project couldn't be easily given to Columbia. After thinking about it, Eric said, "In that case, you might as well announce it directly to the public and add a sequel to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Anyway, the other 3 movies are real. When the time comes, you can say that the plan for the sequel failed for various reasons. The public won't suspect anything." "Good idea." Peter Guber clapped his hands. "But Eric, why don't you just make a sequel to Mr. and Mrs. Smith?" "Okay, but I don't have time to think about the script for the sequel, so I have to find another screenwriter and try to write the script for the sequel. If the script can satisfy me, I will start the production of the sequel." Chapter 524. Eric was pestered by Peter Guber for nearly an hour. If it weren't for the important meeting he had to attend, Eric estimated that he would have been consumed by this guy the whole morning. After sending Peter Guber away, Eric quickly came to the big conference room at Firefly's headquarters. At this time, almost all the executives of Firefly Pictures had arrived. Even many of the executives of the overseas branch had rushed back. There were a total of 40 to 50 people. Because the summer vacation was coming in June, as a film and entertainment company, the departments of Firefly would also usher in the busiest period. In order not to delay work, the management arranged the operation and financial summary meeting for the first half of the year at the end of May. Firefly was not a listed company, so there was no need to wait for the official financial report for the first half of the year to be released, and then conduct business summary and adjustment according to the requirements of the board of directors. In the first half of the year, the film market in North America did not perform well. Only Paramount Pictures' Sex Deal, released during the Easter holiday, was lucky enough to get a box office of more than $100 million. In the first 6 months of 1993, Firefly released a total of 7 low-budget movies. The best box office performance was a family adventure comedy called Cat and Dog Games, which was produced by Disney and distributed by Bowie International. It earned more than $43 million at the box office in North America. The total box office of the 7 movies in North America was only $180 million. This number seemed a bit insignificant, but Firefly's total turnover in the first half of the year from sales of videotapes, peripheral copyright operations, theme parks, Disney stores, and other businesses reached $2 billion. The pre-tax profit was also more than $250 million. In this way, the revenue from the box office only accounted for about 10% of the total turnover of Firefly Pictures. Eric was very clear that if this revenue ratio was really reached, it would be the healthiest business structure for a comprehensive development media group. This would also allow a media company to have the strongest ability to resist risks and not fall into the predicament of bankruptcy because of the failure of 1 or 2 movies. However, in fact, Firefly was far from reaching this point. The reason for this temporary revenue ratio was mainly because most of the first half of the year was in the off-season. The most popular summer and New Year's movies were concentrated in the last 6 months of the year, and Firefly's main movies were also released in the last 6 months. The total production cost of the 3 movies Jurassic Park, Crash, and The Bug Crisis during the summer was more than the total production and distribution cost of the 7 movies in the first half of the year. The whole meeting didn't end until 4:30 in the afternoon. Although there was still half an hour before work, Eric had already planned to go home early. However, as soon as he packed up his things, he was stopped by Katzenberg. Behind him was Patrick Schneider, the head of Disneyland Paris. Because of the major mistakes in the management of Disneyland Paris last year, Eric and Katzenberg originally planned to withdraw Patrick Schneider back to the headquarters, but then the management of Disneyland Paris showed good improvements under Patrick Schneider's management. After discussing with Katzenberg, Eric decided to let Patrick Schneider stay for the time being. Today's meeting also talked about the situation of Disneyland Paris. In the first 2 quarters, the total number of visitors to Disneyland Paris reached 6 million, and the operation had reached a break-even. It might even achieve a certain profit in the second half of the year. As a project that was seriously out of control during the development process, Eric's requirement for Disneyland Paris was to be able to maintain a break-even and not become a burden to the group. Being able to achieve a profit already made Eric overjoyed. After all, after the opening of Disneyland Paris in the original space-time, it basically brought hundreds of millions of dollars of losses to Disney's headquarters every year. There were very few profitable years. Eric, this is the case. Louis Bartlow, the representative of the French investors of Disneyland Paris, also came to Los Angeles. The French are not very satisfied with the current situation of Disneyland Paris. They hope to take back the management rights of Disneyland Paris. Katzenberg had never been a long-winded person, and he was not used to beating around the bush. In a few words, he explained the reason why he stopped Eric. Eric did not take the 2 back to his office. He motioned for them to sit down at the conference table and asked, "I remember that we told them the situation of Disneyland Paris very clearly last year. We also made a lot of changes. Isn't the situation developing in a good way now? Why do they still have this idea?" Patrick Schneider, who was sitting on the other side, had the most detailed understanding of the inside story. He said, Mr. Williams, the situation of Disneyland Paris is indeed developing in a good way, but compared with the profitability of Tokyo Disneyland, the gap is too big. The reason why the French have this idea should be because they are affected by the Japanese running Tokyo Disneyland. Eric sneered in his heart. The French have a good plan, but they don't consider whether they have the ability to do so. The success of Tokyo Disneyland mainly lies in the Japanese's recognition and worship of American culture. These conditions do not exist in Europe. He remembered that in the original space-time, because of the huge losses in the early stages of Disneyland Paris, Disney's headquarters was forced to give up the control of the park. As a result, Disneyland Paris did not change for more than 10 years in the hands of the French. Instead, it became more and more a burden to Disney. Based on this alone, Eric could not give up the control of Disneyland Paris. After all, Disney's headquarters had a wealth of operating experience. This was also the reason why Disneyland in Paris was able to quickly adjust and gradually improve in less than a year after the problem was discovered. If it was handed over to the French, who knew what these people would do to the park? In any case, we will definitely not give up the control of Disneyland Paris, Eric said. He looked at the two and asked, "Is it Louis Bartlow who wants to see me? He invited us to a cocktail party tonight to talk about this matter. The two of us have already agreed. After all, you are a guest from afar. We just wanted to tell you and discuss how to deal with it," Carson said. He obviously knew that Eric would not attend this so-called cocktail party. "I won't go." Eric shook his head, thought for a while and said, "Aren't the French jealous of Tokyo Disneyland? Since they want to take back the control, it is not impossible." Before Eric could finish, Carson hurriedly said, "Eric, absolutely not." Eric stopped Carson's words and said with a smile, "Wait for me to finish. You know that I was pestered by Peter Goober some time ago. If we refuse, I think we will definitely be pestered by the French in the future. So let's just give them the price. Since they want to get the same control as the Japanese, then just like the Japanese, they can buy back all the shares of Disneyland in Paris. We can be like Tokyo Disneyland, and only charge a patent licensing fee." Hearing Eric's words, Katzenberg was relieved. Patrick Schneider also smiled and said, "That's a good idea. If the French are willing to buy the shares in our hands, then the headquarters can get rid of this big burden, and we can continue to earn profits from Disneyland in Paris without suffering any losses. In the future, even if Disneyland Paris can't survive in the hands of the French, we don't need to take too much responsibility." Although the situation of Disneyland Paris had improved, as the person in charge, Patrick Schneider didn't feel relaxed at all. Most of the time, he was worried that the situation of the park would suddenly worsen. If he could get rid of this burden and return to the headquarters, he would be more than happy to do so. However, he also knew that this was unlikely. The French would not be stupid enough to take all the risks. Therefore, Eric's condition was basically equivalent to cutting off the French's idea of taking back Disneyland Paris. Carson also said at this time, "In that case, Eric, maybe you can come to the banquet tonight. Wouldn't it be better for you to personally tell Louis Bartlow about this condition? I'm looking forward to his expression when he hears this condition." Eric shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's not necessary. In addition, Jeffrey, although you have this condition as a shield, I think you can definitely explain the pros and cons to him clearly with your eloquence. There's no need to let the French think about this all the time." "Okay, I got it." Carson nodded. After talking about this matter, the three of them left the conference room together. As they walked towards the elevator, Patrick Schneider suddenly said, "Mr. Williams, I heard that the company is recently planning to open a new artistic film production department, dedicated to producing award-winning films, right?" Eric nodded and said with a smile, "Michael is now in charge of the planning of this department. You don't want to recommend yourself to be the person in charge, do you?" There were too many people named Michael, but Patrick Schneider still knew that the Michael that Eric mentioned was the CEO of Firefly, Michael Lynn. "Of course not, Mr. Williams. However, I have been staying in France and have a good relationship with the film and television industry there. Recently, a very good young French director is planning to come to Hollywood. Although he is only in his early 30s, He has already been nominated for several César Awards. Speaking of which, this guy's first film was nominated for a César Award at the age of 25. This is very rare in the French film industry. Everyone knows that in the conservative film industry of France, it is 100 times more difficult for young people to make a name for themselves than in Hollywood. What's even rarer is that this director's work is both commercial and artistic. The three of them walked into the elevator together. Then Katzenberg said, "It is not so easy for a French director to get the recognition of an Oscar, unless they have made their debut in Hollywood." Patrick Schneider was just asked by someone to mention this to Eric. He also knew that Katzenberg was telling the truth. When he was about to agree, he heard Eric ask, "What is the name of this director?" "Luc Besson," Patrick Schneider replied. Eric thought that it was indeed this guy. He smiled and said, "What a coincidence. I just saw his film Nikita. It was not bad." If White Dove Wu's 3 axes in Hollywood were slow motion, close-ups, and doves, then Eric's impression of Luc Besson's 3 axes was to chase, kill, and kill. This was not to say that Luc Besson's film style was monotonous. It was just that in the works of Luc Besson that Eric had seen, there were too many chase and kill plots. From the early Nikita, to the later Hurricane Rescue, and the somewhat inexplicable box office success of Supernatural, etc., they could not avoid this kind of plot. And the audience was also very attracted to this kind of simple and crude plot that stimulated adrenaline. Thinking of this, Eric asked, "Pat, you said that Luc Besson is going to Hollywood. What's going on?" Patrick Schneider replied, "He plans to make a movie with a killer theme. He plans to shoot it in New York, so he is looking for a collaborator here." Eric thought that a movie about a killer in New York had to be Leon the Assassin. Leon the Assassin. How about this? Let the production department contact him. I will read the script first. If possible, Firefly can be responsible for the investment and production. Patrick Schneider did not expect Eric to make such a decision on the spot. He nodded and said, "No problem. He is also in Los Angeles recently. I will contact him tonight." After exiting the elevator, the three of them said goodbye to each other and got into their respective cars. The chauffeur drove the car onto the road. Eric looked out of the window in a daze. The trajectory of the world had changed so much under his influence. Although the director was still the same director, and the male lead should be the same male lead, he did not know if Lorita was still the same Lorita. The car passed by a cinema. Eric caught a glimpse of the 2-meter-tall Jurassic Park poster hanging on the wall outside the cinema. Only then did he collect his thoughts. Jurassic Park was going to be released soon. This was the most important thing now. The initial investment of $25 million for publicity had been completed. Eric did not hesitate to ask for another $25 million. Furthermore, with the success of Mr. and Mrs. Smith as an example, Eric did not hesitate this time. He insisted on raising $3,000 for the release of Jurassic Park. There was no doubt that Jurassic Park would be the first movie in North America to raise more than $3,000 for its release. Now, Jurassic Park had entered its final pre-release period. Chapter 525. When Jurassic Park began the last period of high-intensity publicity before its release, on May 28, Carlock Pictures' first summer movie, Peak of the Mountain, officially opened on more than 2,300 screens. The release of this movie also marked the arrival of the 1993 summer movie, Peak of the Mountain starred Sylvester Stallone. It told the story of the rescue team member played by Stallone and his companions who encountered a group of bandits on the Snow Mountain and were reborn in despair. The movie cost $70 million and was produced by Carlock Pictures, which was supported by German capital, and was distributed by MGM, which had just undergone restructuring. There was also an episode in this. Carlock Pictures movie was originally distributed by Columbia. However, after Columbia reached a cooperation agreement with Firefly last year, Peter Guber canceled the cooperation with Carlock Pictures. After the fraud of the Italian businessman Giancarlo, MGM was taken over by the creditor Credit Lyonnais of France. Credit Lyonnais, which held the control, auctioned MGM at the end of last year. However, no one was willing to take over. Credit Lyonnais restructured MGM and poached Frank Marchese, John Carrier and others, who had been executives at Warner Brothers, to form a management team. In the process of MGM's restructuring, Carlock Pictures happened to be looking for a distributor for its own movie. The new management team, which urgently needed to reverse the decline of MGM, signed a distribution agreement with Carlock. However, fantasy is beautiful, reality is always cruel. Although Stallone's performance was very hard, and there was no lack of dangerous scenes in the movie, Peak of the Mountain was released on May 28 and only got $16 million in the first 3 days, accompanied by a sound of criticism from the critics. Most of the film critics gave the movie a low score, claiming that the plot of the movie was old-fashioned and naive, and that they could completely guess the rest of the plot of the movie after only 10 minutes. Moreover, a scene in the movie where the protagonist burned money to keep warm also became the focus of a large number of media ridicule. The movie cost $70 million, and MGM spent another $30 million for the publicity of the movie. The huge cost of $100 million was indeed no different from burning money. Moreover, the quality of the movie did not burn at all after burning so much money. Although the result of $16 million in 3 days in the first week was not too miserable, with the release of Jurassic Park in the second week, most box office analysts estimated that the North American box office of Peak of the Mountain would stop in the range of $50 million, even less than half of the total cost of Peak of the Mountain. The box office in North America is so bleak, and other distribution channels will not be too ideal. The situation of the producer and distribution company's huge losses is almost doomed. Of course, the management team of MGM was not willing to take over the film company and release such a bleak situation in the first heavyweight film released. After the box office of Peak of the Mountain was released on the first weekend, the senior management of MGM held an emergency meeting. After some discussion, they quickly came up with a response plan. Because the reviews of Peak of the Mountain were already very difficult to reverse, MGM decided to find another way. The next day, a large number of articles appeared in many newspapers complaining about Peak of the Mountain, claiming that the film quality of Peak of the Mountain was not as bad as the critics said, and that the reason for the one-sided situation was completely because of the wantonly smearing by the competitors. As soon as these articles came out, it immediately caused a lot of response. The release date of Jurassic Park was just a week after the release of Peak of the Mountain, and the other movies released at the same time were not as heavyweight as Peak of the Mountain and Jurassic Park. Therefore, the competitors mentioned in these articles could not be more obvious. Therefore, after many people saw this news, they subconsciously sympathized with the tragic experience of Peak of the Mountain. In the face of Firefly Pictures' increasingly strong position in Hollywood, the media controlled by other film companies did not mind adding fuel to the fire and adding some trouble to Firefly. In just a few days, the media formed a trend of crusading against the evil forces of the film industry. At the same time, Jurassic Park entered its last week of intense publicity. In addition to more intense print and television advertising campaigns, since May 25, the main creative team of Jurassic Park began a promotional tour in major North American cities and held test screenings in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, Philadelphia, and other places. In the face of the media's crusade against Peak of the Mountain being smeared, Firefly Pictures remained silent. Firefly's silence did not mean that some people would allow Firefly to remain silent. MGM's goal was to provoke a confrontation between the two movies and achieve the effect of Peak of the Mountain's box office rebound effect. However, in the process of Jurassic Park's promotional tour, basically the media that were on good terms with Firefly were basically invited, and MGM had not found any opportunity to do so. Because Jurassic Park was scheduled to be released at the same time in the UK, the main creative team had to fly to London on June 3 to attend the premiere in the UK. The North American premiere was scheduled on June 2, 2 days before Jurassic Park was released. As usual, the North American premiere was held at the famous Chinese Grand Theatre in Hollywood. The premiere started smoothly, But after the media's Q&A session, a reporter asked Eric abruptly after it was his turn, "Mr. Williams, about the recent smearing of Peak of the Mountain, starring Mr. Stallone. What do you think?" Hearing this question, Charlie West, who was in charge of organizing the premiere, broke out in a cold sweat, and the atmosphere at the scene immediately fell into a state of stagnation. Before this, it was not that Firefly did not discuss this matter internally, but Eric's final result was to deal with it coldly and not give any response. Firefly's distribution department also executed very well, but they did not expect such a big mistake to occur at such an important occasion like the premiere. Charlie West wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and stood at the exit of the backstage looking down at the stage. The executive wanted to rush up and strangle the reporter who asked the question. After all, Fox TV was broadcasting the premiere live. "Mr. West, do you want to pause the broadcast?" Charlie West was a little overwhelmed, and the head of Fox TV had already come over. Charlie West glared at the other party. "Isn't this nonsense? The question just now has been broadcast live. Suddenly cutting off the broadcast is like slapping the face of the person on the stage." Eric held the microphone in his hand and was silent for a moment with everyone else. After seeing the news a few days ago, Eric more or less understood the ins and outs of the matter. Not to mention this life, even in his previous life, when he was not completely integrated into the industry, he had seen too many similar situations. If Magnificent Peak was a good movie and had a lot of fans, then MGM's method would have had a concrete impact. Unfortunately, Magnificent Peak was just a very mediocre popcorn movie, and it was impossible to form a die-hard fan base. Therefore, although MGM's tactics would cause some people to sympathize with Magnificent Peak and buy tickets to support it, most ordinary people would still maintain the attitude of a bystander. At the same time, Firefly did not do anything to defame Magnificent Peak, so MGM could not obtain any substantial evidence to prove this point. They did not dare to blatantly name Jurassic Park, so they could only use some ambiguous words to mislead the readers. What MGM wanted was for Firefly to take the initiative to respond. Once that happened, it would be justified for MGM to fight back against Firefly's remarks, and it would also create an established fact in the hearts of ordinary people. But now, facing the camera lens of the live broadcast, Eric knew that he had to respond on the spot. After thinking for a moment, Eric picked up the microphone again and asked the reporter, "Sir, do you have a lot of friends?" The reporter was stunned. Although he did not know why Eric suddenly asked this, he instinctively became alert. "Mr. Williams, this has nothing to do with my question. Please answer my question directly, okay?" Eric stared at the reporter sharply and said in a deep voice, "Your question has nothing to do with this premiere, but I've decided to answer you. So, tell me first, do you have a lot of friends?" The reporter felt the pressure from Eric's gaze and subconsciously shrank his neck and blurted out, "Yes. Yes, I mean I have a lot of friends." "Then, do you often discuss topics about movies with your friends?" The reporter thought that he had calmed down and said, "Yes, Mr. Williams, I'm an entertainment reporter, so they often ask me some questions about movies." At this point, the reporter was shocked again. He subconsciously thought that Eric had led him into a trap. He thought that Eric would ask him whether Magnificent Peak was good or bad. However, Eric did not continue to ask. Instead, he said, "Okay, then I can answer you now about my opinion on your question. Hollywood movies have been developed for more than 80 years now, and movies have become an indispensable part of everyone's entertainment life. Even if many people don't go to the cinema, they can still watch movies through TV, video, and other channels. Such a long time is enough to develop the ability of ordinary people to judge whether a movie is good or bad." Mr. Williams. When the reporter heard that Eric still did not directly answer his question, he was about to interrupt, but when he met Eric's sharp eyes, he immediately changed his words. Eric continued, "Everyone's judgment of whether a movie is good or bad does not depend on the amount of investment in the movie. Otherwise, the movie Throat Island 2 years ago would probably be the box office champion of that year." Hearing this, everyone present laughed, and the reporter couldn't help but ask at this time, "Mr. Williams, you didn't answer my question." "Well, I'll answer your question. I have no opinion on the matter you just mentioned. The promotion of a movie is just an advertising means to let people know that such a movie is about to be released. In fact, whether a person will choose to watch this movie, in addition to the word of mouth in the newspaper, the most important criterion is how the people around them talk about this movie. Just like you just said, your friends will ask you, an entertainment reporter, whether a movie is good or bad. So, if you think that a movie has been discredited, then ask your friends who have seen this movie. If they say it is good, then you can go to the cinema to watch it. If they don't think it is good, then you don't have to watch it. That's all. Speaking of this, Eric smiled and said to the camera, "Of course, this method is also effective for Jurassic Park. You don't have to pay attention to any comments on Jurassic Park in the media. You can just decide whether you want to watch this movie based on the feelings of your friends." Hearing Eric's confident tone, the audience at the premiere couldn't help but applaud. The reporter who tried to stir up trouble sat down and didn't continue to pester Lu Zhou. At this time, in front of thousands of televisions, many viewers who originally felt sympathy for the discrediting of Magnificent Peak silently changed their minds. Although many people still didn't completely side with the innocent side of Firefly, many people were no longer so indignant. Instead, they decided to ask around for their opinions on Magnificent Peak. After the reporter sat down, the host of the premiere looked at Eric and asked if he wanted to continue the Q&A session. Eric nodded gently. The host continued to call for other reporters while hoping that another person wouldn't jump out to cause trouble. "Mr. Williams, I heard that you were very confident. Also, Firefly broke the rules and arranged 3,000 screens for Jurassic Park. So do you have your own box office expectations for Jurassic Park?" This time, it was a black-haired woman with glasses who spoke. Her question was also very normal. After hearing this question, many people in the audience couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Eric looked at the woman and smiled as he said, "You know, before a movie is released, whether it's the distribution company or some professional organizations, they all have their own box office predictions. I'm sure you've seen the answer to this question in many newspapers. Of course, most of the predictions say that the box office of Jurassic Park in North America will be between US $200 million to US $300 million. The female reporter replied skillfully. She then looked at Eric and said, "However, I think everyone is more curious. Since Mr. Williams can break the rules and arrange 3,000 screens for this movie, what is your box office expectation?" Chapter 527. Jurassic Park is aiming for $1 billion box office. There is a disruptor at the premiere of Jurassic Park. Williams announced that the new film will hit the global box office of $1 billion US. The director of Jurassic Park has made a bold statement of $1 billion, and it is an inventory of the movies with the potential of $1 billion box office in the history of Hollywood. Unsurprisingly, the day after the premiere, the media exploded because of Eric's words last night. If Eric had advertised that the box office of Jurassic Park was expected to be $1.5 or $2 billion, it would have definitely been treated as a joke by most of the media. But this figure happened to be $1 billion US, which was only $200 million US away from Hollywood's current highest box office record. However, although this gap seemed to be within reach, no one has been able to break through it. As early as 1977, the first Star Wars that came out of nowhere swept the global box office of $770 million US. But in the following 10 years, although there were many movies with a global box office of more than $700 million US, no movie could break through the figure of $800 million US. Therefore, some professional box office evaluation agencies have said more than once that $800 million US may be the global box office limit of a movie. However, in recent years, as long as people who care about the film industry can clearly find that the world film market is expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. Therefore, Eric's prediction of $1 billion US for Jurassic Park formed two distinct factions in just one day, and both sides seem to be able to come up with very sufficient evidence to prove that they were correct. The mutual conflict in the media has once again hyped the topic of Jurassic Park to the highest point. At the same time, Eric's intention of releasing these words has been successfully achieved. Not many people care about the bare peak of the mountain anymore. After receiving the call from Eric's assistant, Mario Kasser, CEO of Carlock Pictures, was both angry and aggrieved. Although he knew a little about that matter, it was the MGM distribution team that proposed the specific plan and implementation, which really had little to do with him. Although he was wronged, Mario Kasser did not dare to ignore it. He contacted the person in charge of MGM overnight and firmly stopped MGM from continuing to rely on Jurassic Park for hype. Of course, MGM did not agree at first, but after hearing Mario Kasser repeated the phone call he received, they had to give up. Carlock did not dare to offend Firefly, and MGM, which was in a precarious situation, did not dare to do so. The North American premiere of Jurassic Park was held on Wednesday, June 2nd. Therefore, although the topic of $1 billion box office that Eric threw out caused controversy, this dispute did not have time to reach a white-hot level. Because the day after the topic was created, it was the day Jurassic Park was released in 3,000 theaters in the United States. Everyone knew that in a few days, the real box office numbers would become the most convincing tool. It was another day of solid 6-hour training. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the exhausted three girls returned to the apartment and collapsed in their bedrooms as usual to recover their energy. Originally, they thought that after enduring the initial period, the following training would be much easier. However, they recently discovered that their training schedule gradually increased with the passage of time. Although it did not reach the limit they could bear, it was definitely enough to exhaust all their energy for a day. It was not until it was dark outside that the three girls strolled out of the bedroom. Penelope was the last to come out. Seeing the two girls watching TV in the living room, she asked, "What are we eating tonight?" "Whatever," replied Theron. "It doesn't matter," said Kate. "Oh, I've never eaten the 2 dishes you mentioned," joked Penelope as she walked to the kitchen. The three girls agreed to take turns cooking, and today was her turn. After a simple dinner, the three girls gathered on the sofa in the living room again to watch TV. Time often flew when they were bored. Before they knew it, it was already 10 o'clock at night. Charlize Theron glanced at Penelope, who was absent-mindedly holding a fashion magazine on the left, and then looked at Kate, who was staring at the TV on the right. "Hey, you guys. Huh." The two girls did not change their posture, but they each made a sound of confusion. Charlize Theron keenly felt something was wrong, but he glanced at the clock on the wall and asked, "Did you guys buy tickets?" "What? Tickets?" Charlize Theron paused for a moment before slowly spitting out 2 words, "Jurassic Park." Silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then Kate and Penelope laughed together. As they laughed, they talked about someone's past. "Haha, who was the one who said last night that if you want to buy a ticket, you should give it to a homeless person?" Penelope said. She even imitated Charlie's accent and repeated, "I'm definitely not going." "Haha, Penny, do you know this situation is called, why did you hit me?" "Aya, you're still hitting me? Don't think I can't beat you. Take this." "Hoo hoo hoo, puff 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 puff." After fooling around for a while, the three girls walked out of the apartment together. Kate and Penelope were still laughing, and the embarrassment on Charlize's face did not completely disappear. From time to time he would bicker with the other 2 girls. They drove all the way to downtown Santa Monica, parked the car, and walked in front of a cinema. The 3 girls were surprised to find a long line in front of the cinema. There were at least 100 people. "Don't tell me they're all here to watch Jurassic Park?" Penelope asked, a little surprised. "There will definitely be other movies screening tomorrow, but Jurassic Park is the only movie that can make fans line up overnight to buy tickets." Kate looked at the crowd and took out the tickets she bought in the morning with a sense of superiority. Then she suddenly turned to Charlize. "Charlie, am I right?" "It's none of my business." Charlize reached out and snatched a ticket from Kate, turned around and walked away. "I'm going to buy popcorn first. You two wait here." "I want the creamy one," Penelope ordered hastily. She watched Charlize leave, and Penelope and Kate walked into the lobby of the cinema. It was already 11:30. Under the bright lights in the hall, The two girls found the entrance of the screening room. Looking at the continuous stream of people walking in, they couldn't help but say, "It would be great if this scene could appear in our movie in the future." I heard that the script was written by Eric Williams himself. None of his previous scripts have failed. I think it will definitely be very popular, Kate said. I hope so. I don't want to go back to Spain. I might not be able to get a movie there for a long time. My chances are better if I stay in Hollywood. After Penelope finished speaking, she inexplicably sighed. It's been more than a month. Although this sentence seemed a little confusing, Kate knew that Penelope was referring to the fact that the two of them had been in Hollywood for more than a month, but Eric Williams hadn't appeared. Before this, only Charlize Theron had seen him once. The level between the two was too far apart. Of course, Kate couldn't guess his daily life. However, she also felt that since Eric Williams could do so many things at such a young age, he must be very busy. As for Penelope's thoughts, it was even easier to guess. She had been in Hollywood for more than a month, and she had almost gotten every detail of her meeting with Eric Williams from Charlize Theron. Although Charlize was the only one among the three of them who had met Williams once, Penelope was the one who was most familiar with him. Therefore, it was obvious what she was thinking. However, Kate wasn't optimistic about Penelope's thoughts. Eric Williams was not only a Hollywood director, but also a billionaire. Such a Hollywood super-rich guy had countless women eyeing him. How could Penelope, a Spanish girl who had just arrived, have a turn? After a while, Charlize came over with a bunch of snacks. The two girls picked some and walked into the screening room together. Wow, there are so many people. Just now, they saw people coming in continuously, but after walking into the screening room, they found that there were only a few empty seats in the 200-seat screening room. It's all your fault. It took so long to buy snacks, Penelope said to Charlize. Charlize was unwilling. How can you blame me? You were the one who wanted the creamy popcorn. It just happened to be sold out, so I could only wait for a while. Kate interrupted the two girls. Stop arguing, you two. Look at the front, there are still a few empty seats. Let's hurry over. The empty seats with excellent views had long been sold out, so the three girls could only find 3 consecutive empty seats in the second row at the front and sit down. Not long after they sat down, the lights in the screening room dimmed. The story began outside an unknown building. Heavily armed workers carefully docked a container with the entrance of the building. However, although they were very cautious, an accident still happened. A worker was suddenly dragged into the container by something. Although a few electric batons were immediately inserted into the container, only half of the worker's body was left when he was dragged out. In a flash, the eyes of a beast filled with murderous intent were revealed. Seeing this eye, the audience in the cinema who were attracted by the frightening atmosphere created by the beginning of the movie and held their breaths began to whisper. That was the dinosaurs I just now, right? Penelope whispered. Charlize shrugged and said disdainfully, see, it's still deliberately mystifying like in the trailer, only showing a part of it. Kate whispered, Charlie, this is obviously your personal prejudice. At least I feel that the eye just now is like a living thing. There's no trace of a model at all. You must know that this is a dinosaur, not a real live lion or tiger. Since Eric Williams can make the eye so realistic, then a complete dinosaur will definitely not disappoint us. Yes, I think so too, Penelope nodded in agreement. As the three chatted, the scene began to switch between the amber mine in the Dominican Republic and the dinosaur fossil excavation site. The audience gradually understood the cause of all this. Because of the loss of life during the transportation of the dinosaur, Dr. Hammond's project was temporarily suspended by the investors. In order to continue the Jurassic Park project, Dr. Hammond invited dinosaur archaeologist Dr. Alan Grant, chaos scientist Malcolm, and his lawyer to visit the dinosaur island in Costa Rica. He wanted these influential people in the industry to express their support for the Jurassic Park project. At the same time, he also invited his grandson and granddaughter. This was the cause of all this adventure. On the helicopter to Costa Rica, Dr. Hammond did not reveal his true purpose in order to shock these people. The group landed on the island's helipad and took a jeep to the base. When they passed by a flat grassland, The people who were originally discussing their own topics suddenly became sluggish and revealed a shocked expression. The camera turned and swept across the crowd's field of vision. The audience in the theater suddenly let out a faint cry of surprise. On the grassland, several 7-meter-tall long-necked dinosaurs were leisurely strolling on the grassland. A long-necked dinosaur even stopped and tiptoed to eat the tender leaves on the top of a tree. When it landed, because of its heavy body, it produced a muffled bang and shook the ground. Seeing this scene in the dim light, Kate stared at the screen and said to Charlize, "What do you say now?" In any case, these are all fake." Charlize was still stubborn. The two women gently smiled and ignored her. The camera continued to move forward. After the long-necked dinosaurs, in the vast field of vision, groups of all kinds of dinosaurs appeared. Once again, the audience feasted their eyes. After giving the audience a small surprise, the plot began to move into the main topic. The group arrived at the dinosaur hatching base and observed the resurrection process of the dinosaurs. Although a researcher said that all the dinosaurs in the park were female, chaos scientist Malcolm still expressed a strong concern about this kind of behavior that reversed the development of nature. After visiting the dinosaur hatching base, Dr. Hammond arranged for Dr. Grant and his two grandsons to sit in a self-driving jeep and tour the Jurassic Park. The real adventure began. Throughout the tour, there were endless problems. None of the dinosaurs were very supportive. The first Triceratops they encountered was also sick. At the same time, Fatty Dennis, who was in charge of the park's programming, secretly turned off the park's power grid in order to steal the dinosaur embryos. Tyrannosaurus rex, Velociraptor and other carnivorous dinosaurs escaped their cages and caused a series of disasters. Chapter 528. Due to the disaster caused by the power outage, the plot entered its most thrilling period. Although many of the audience had already realized that something terrible was about to happen, when the T-Rex appeared in front of them with its terrifying footsteps, many of them couldn't help but cry out in surprise. The narrative was also divided into several strands. Multi-strand narration was often very difficult to grasp. If the director didn't grasp it well, it could arouse disgust from the audience by abruptly switching scenes at a moment when the audience was very interested in the plot. However, Jurassic Park didn't have the slightest such a problem. Whether it was the fat programmer who rushed to the dock with the embryos and was killed by the T-Rex, or the Jeep team that encountered the T-Rex, they all tugged at the heartstrings of the audience. Countless examples had already proven that if a movie only had grand scenes or exquisite special effects, it often wouldn't be able to achieve outstanding box office sales. However, Jurassic Park had perfectly combined the best special effects technology of this era with a wonderful story with ups and downs. It allowed the audience to enjoy a visual feast of the resurrection of an ancient behemoth. At the same time, they also experienced a strange adventure filled with screams and screams along with the protagonists in the movie. 2 hours of adventure unknowingly passed by, and the movie finally came to an end. When Dr. Settler escaped from the dinosaur incubation base with his female assistant and 2 children, everyone heaved a deep sigh of relief, as if they had escaped with their lives. When the credits slowly rose along with the ending music, most of the audience in the cinema didn't immediately get up and leave. Instead, they discussed the various plots of the movie with their companions. Starting from the second half of the movie, the 3 girls stopped whispering to each other. Instead, they focused their attention on the big screen. At first, they complained about not being able to get a better seat. But soon, they realized that because they were very close to the big screen, the first few rows of audience members got a better view of the movie. When the Tyrannosaurus Rex opened its mouth and chased after the jeep that Malcolm and the others were in through the forest corridor, some of them even subconsciously leaned back to avoid it. After the lights came back on, the reluctant crowd finally began to leave the theater one after another. The 3 girls also followed the crowd out of the theater. Hearing the couple beside her mumbling that it wasn't enough and that they wanted to watch it again, Kate looked at the other 2 women and said, "Charlie, Penny, what do you think about watching it again tomorrow?" "Okay." Penelope immediately nodded and said, "I've watched Tornado several times last year. I thought that the special effects in that movie were already a miracle." I still remember the scene of the level 5 tornado. I didn't expect to see an even more exciting dinosaur scene in this movie. I must watch it again, no twice. The three of them walked to the parking lot as they talked. Charlie took out his keys and opened the car door. He said, 3 times is fine, but tomorrow is Friday, not the weekend. Look at the time. If you guys are too excited to sleep, you might be late tomorrow. Penelope quickly looked at her watch and said, it's already 2 o'clock, she said as she crawled into the back seat of the car. Let's go back. I don't want to be punished by doing the horse dance. That's the most horrible torture I've ever seen in my life. How is that torture? Didn't you hear Master Yuan say that if they were lazy when they were practicing martial arts when they were young, they would be punished by not eating for an entire day? They would even be beaten with such thick thorns on their backs, Charlie said as he started the car. He even used one hand to gesture the thorns that he had never seen before. He must be scaring us, Penelope said indifferently. Although her family wasn't very well off when she was young, and she was only the daughter of a hairdresser, she had never been punished by a teacher when she was dancing in elementary school. Therefore, it was difficult for her to understand what the Eastern martial arts master that Firefly had invited for them said. At this time, Kate interrupted and said, I don't think he's scaring us. I remember when I was in high school, I went to watch a box of Eastern movies with my classmates. I don't remember the name, but it was about Eastern children learning to perform in a drama academy. Those children were only 6 or 7 years old, but they were often beaten and scolded. They seemed to call it something like a strict teacher produces outstanding students. When Penelope heard Kate's words, a mischievous smile suddenly appeared at the corner of her mouth. She looked at her and said, After hearing what you said, I finally understand what Master Yuan meant when he looked at you at the beginning of the training. He obviously wanted to beat you up, but he couldn't do it. He must be feeling very uncomfortable in his heart. Get lost, I didn't learn how to dance as long as the two of you. Kate reached out and tickled Penelope's waist. Although she had barely reached the standard after more than a month of training, there was still a big gap between her and the two girls who had a solid foundation. Therefore, she hated being teased by Penelope and Charlie the most. Although it was 2 o'clock in the morning in Los Angeles, the streets were still not deserted. However, the traffic had decreased by a lot. Charlie listened helplessly to the two girls playing in the back seat. She quietly stepped on the accelerator and sped up. She wanted to go back and rest as soon as possible. She also didn't want to be late for tomorrow's training. Although the Eastern person in charge of their training would not punish them physically, a staff member of Firefly would often supervise their various performances at the training site. Although she didn't say it out loud, after watching Jurassic Park, Charlie was shocked. At the same time, she also had greater expectations for the upcoming movie, Thunderbolt Charming Baby. Since it was a movie written by that guy, even if it couldn't be compared to Jurassic Park, it would definitely be very good. Compared to Charlie and the other two girls who were relaxed after watching the movie, many people were not so relaxed that night. On a street in Beverly Hills, Michael Eisner also walked out of the cinema at about the same time. Although Eisner said that he wanted to attend the screening of Jurassic Park in a phone call with Eric, and although Firefly sent an invitation letter later, Michael Eisner still found an excuse to refuse. However, not attending the screening didn't mean that he didn't care about Jurassic Park. As early as Jurassic Park had just started pre-selling tickets, he had asked his assistant to help him book tickets for the midnight screening. Ordinary movie fans basically treated the viewing process as entertainment. After watching it, they would be satisfied, but Michael Eisner saw something deeper from Jurassic Park. The plot structure of this movie was, of course, very good, but this was not what Michael Eisner cared about the most. Hollywood didn't lack screenwriters who could write good scripts, nor did it lack directors who could make good movies with good scripts. What he cared about most was the level of special effects shown in Jurassic Park. If Tornado had just opened a window a year ago, then Michael Eisner was sure that the appearance of Jurassic Park would completely open the door to a new era of special effects movies. If the big Hollywood studios wanted to survive and develop better, they could only follow the trend of this era. Firefly Pictures would undoubtedly become the leader of this era. Thinking of these things, Michael Eisner stood by the road for a while. A middle-aged man quickly walked over with another man and woman behind him. Mr. Eisner, the middle-aged man greeted and was about to introduce, but Michael Eisner waved his hand and said, "What's the result?" The middle-aged man winked at the young man on his left. The young man opened a folder and handed a piece of paper to Michael Eisner. He said, "Mr. Eisner, our company has completed the statistics of 100 screening halls of Jurassic Park in Los Angeles according to your instructions. These are all 200-seat venues. After statistics, the average number of audience in 100 screening halls is 159. The occupancy rate is 79.5%, and the single theater box office is about $1,500. At this point, the young man looked up at Michael Eisner's face with some apprehension. Seeing that the other party's expression didn't change, he continued, "With the density of cinemas in Los Angeles, we expect this occupancy rate to be relatively low in the country. Therefore, our company's total box office for the midnight screening of Jurassic Park is estimated to be $4.5 million. At this point, the young man stopped and waited for Michael Eisner's continued instructions. Michael Eisner softly recited the figure of $4.5 million before asking with uncertainty, "Before this, which movie had the highest midnight box office record?" The young man did not hesitate and blurted out, "The first Batman 4 years ago too. $21 million. However, there were only 2,200 screens for Batman." Michael Eisner could tell that the young man's last sentence might be to flatter or comfort him, but he did not feel comforted at all. A simple calculation showed that the midnight box office of Batman was only $1,000, which was 1/3 less than that of Jurassic Park. If the scale of fans was compared, the fans of Batman's decades of serialization in North America definitely far exceeded that of the novel Jurassic Park. Therefore, the beautiful midnight box office of Jurassic Park was definitely not as simple as fans. Moreover, Michael Eisner vaguely remembered that the first week box office of Batman 4 years ago was about $60 million. The midnight box office of Jurassic Park more than doubled the record set by Batman. Then, what would the first week box office of Jurassic Park be? What would the box office potential of Jurassic Park be in the future? Perhaps $1 billion might not be the final limit of this movie. After standing there for a few minutes, the cold night wind gently swept over his body. Michael Eisner came back to his senses and said to the middle-aged man, "Mark, ask the company's planning department to keep an eye on all the information about the subsequent release of Jurassic Park. I want to see a detailed report every day. In addition, within a week, ask them to produce an analysis of the early publicity methods of Jurassic Park. Tell Chris that I can let bygones be bygones, but this is his last chance. If the report in a week doesn't satisfy me, he can pack up and leave." "I understand, Mr. Eisner." The middle-aged man nodded. The young man and woman, who might be employees of a data research company, consciously lowered their heads and pretended to be absent-minded. Obviously, they did not want to be involved in the internal struggles of these large corporations. Michael Eisner discussed something with the middle-aged man in a low voice, then got into a black car and drove away. At the same time, similar things were happening in the corners of Los Angeles, the center of Hollywood. Although the executives of several other film companies might not be as attentive as Michael Eisner, they all put their minds on this matter. When Mario Kassar, the CEO of Carlock Pictures, heard the news, he could only be described as depressed. The failure of Bear Peak of the Hill was a foregone conclusion. Originally, Mario Kassar expected Arnold Schwarzenegger's The Last Action Hero to make a comeback next week. However, Jurassic Park was so aggressive that the midnight box office not only broke the midnight box office record in Hollywood, but also doubled the number. Under the influence of Jurassic Park, next week, The Last Action Hero would not be able to do well. The total investment of Bear Peak of the Hill and The Last Action Hero exceeded $150 million, which was exactly twice that of Jurassic Park. Even if the two movies failed, because all the funds came from outsiders, it would not have much impact on Mario Kassar's personal assets. However, with such a huge loss of funds, It would be even more difficult for Carlock Pictures to obtain large sums of money from investors in the future. With a heavy heart, Mario Kassar also forgot the time. He couldn't help but pick up the phone and dialed the number of MGM's president, John Carly. When the beeping sound rang, Mario Kassar realized that it was more than 2 o'clock in the morning. Just as he was about to hang up, the other end was connected. John Carly on the other end of the phone was obviously not in a good mood. In order to release these two movies, MGM raised $60 million and planned to go all out. They did not expect to encounter the rampaging behemoth of Jurassic Park. Now that the publicity fee has been spent, the screening contract with the cinema has been signed, and the 2,000 yuan opening screen has been confirmed. There is no possibility of a delay in the schedule. After Eric's warning, Carlock and MGM did not dare to play any dirty tricks. After all, if they did nothing, they could still linger on. If they angered Firefly, they could face bankruptcy in minutes. Moreover, with the box office potential of Jurassic Park, those small tricks would not have any effect. Hollywood has never heard of a blockbuster movie that caused the box office to plummet because of a scandal in the middle of its release. Mario Kassar and John Carly said some dry words on the phone and hung up discouraged. The next day, the midnight box office of Jurassic Park was released, and the result of $4.59 million immediately caused an uproar in the American media. In addition to the conservative film critics who lamented that Jurassic Park would bring a disastrous change in the art of cinema, more than 90% of the media praised Jurassic Park. Everyone knew that there was nothing to nitpick about the quality of the movie itself or the commercial value it showed. Picking bones in eggs and forcibly smearing it would only be mocked. In this jubilation, the box office of Jurassic Park, in the following days, was released one after another. June 4th, Friday, 21 million. June 5th, Saturday, 24 million. June 6th, Sunday, 22 million. This series of box office data, in the eyes of the industry, can only be described as crazy, because more than 80% of Hollywood movies that can enter the cinema on a large scale, the total box office is not necessarily more than $20 million. Therefore, when Jurassic Park first weekend box office results of more than $71 million, 3 days and midnight in the first week, were released, most of the American media, who had their jaws dropped, could only numbly exclaim, "Wow!" At the same time, there was also news from the United Kingdom. Jurassic Park had been released in the United Kingdom for 3 days and had earned £11 million at the box office in the first 3 days. It had also broken the United Kingdom box office records. When the news came out, a large part of the media that was shouting that Jurassic Park could not get $1 billion at the box office, a large part of the media directly changed the direction of the news. On the weekday, Jurassic Park was still harvesting box office at a rate of more than $10 million on the same day in 3,000 theaters in North America. Without any suspense, after a full week, Jurassic Park earned $114 million in North America. At this point, Jurassic Park broke all the Hollywood box office records that could be broken. A record-breaking $3,000 in the first week. A record-breaking $4.59 million in midnight box office. A record-breaking $21 million in the first day box office. A record-breaking $71 million in the first weekend box office record. A record-breaking $114 million in the first week box office record. Moreover, when several overseas box office market data were sent back to China, not many people in Hollywood doubted that Jurassic Park would not only break the $790 million global box office record set by E.T., but also break the $1 billion mark. It was almost a certainty. Chapter 529. When the first day box office figures of Jurassic Park were released, Eric and the crew were still in London. Originally, everyone was a little tired after crossing the Atlantic Ocean for 2 consecutive premieres, but when they heard about the record-breaking box office figures of Jurassic Park, the fatigue of the crew was swept away. Everyone knew what it meant to double the midnight record and achieve a first-day box office of $21 million. So everyone was very excited. That night, Eric booked a banquet hall at the Hyde Park Hotel, where the crew was staying, and invited everyone to party all night. Although the London premiere had ended, the movie would be released in other European countries in the following month. Small countries such as Belgium and Luxembourg did not even have a premiere. They only needed 1 or 2 actors to appear on some TV talk shows or interviews. However, Eric still had to make an appearance in France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, the major European countries. Therefore, after the London premiere, Eric did not leave and continued to stay in London. It had been more than 5 years since he woke up one morning in the summer of 1988 and found himself in this strange space and time. Eric had almost forgotten all about his original body. However, the British media obviously did not forget about him as the little boy from Walworth. Anyway, on the day Eric and his crew landed at Heathrow Airport, a London newspaper called him that. Walworth was a district in the southeast of London. Eric searched his memory, but could barely piece together some winding streets and alleys. If he was really thrown in the so-called Walworth district, he would never be able to find his way around. However, the kind London tabloids published all the streets and alleys where his original body had lived for 8 years in the following days, and very sentimentally hoped that he would go back and take a look. Although the British were not as crazy as the Koreans who wanted to take the whole world for themselves, they always adhered to the proud insistence of, what's mine is mine, and what's mine is still mine. Although he was a little disgruntled, Eric still gave the British a lot of face on occasions such as the premiere. In the face of the media's questions, he did not hesitate to reveal some beautiful words, such as missing his hometown. After all, gaining the favor of this country would be a lot of benefits for the release of his movie in the future. After attending the premiere, the exciting box office in North America came back. The other main creators of the crew split up and went to other countries on the European continent to promote the movie. Eric did not immediately relax. He attended one party after another, and after a whole week he finally had some free time. Although he still received a lot of party invitations, he could proudly decline most of them. Although Eric was not very fond of the British, he was still very interested in the city of London. So he asked the branch company to find a tour guide for him, and he walked through the corners of London. The tour guide was a native West End girl named Carolyn Wilson. She was said to be a descendant of nobility. Although she was young, she was very knowledgeable. She was even more professional than the professional tour guides when it came to the various illusions of any scenic spot in London. According to the branch company's manager, the girl was a top student at the University of Cambridge. She took the job only for the summer work-study program. However, the girl had a little pedantry unique to the British. Although the two were in an employer-employee relationship, the girl did not have the slightest awareness that the young man opposite her was her temporary boss. If she did not agree with some of Eric's views, she would immediately speak out, and before her words, she would add a proud, "I beg your pardon." It was kind of cute. Eric and the girl stood on the deck of a slowly moving yacht on the Thames River, looking at the scenery slowly passing by on both sides of the river. That's the Parliament House, also known as the Palace of Westminster. This building was rebuilt after the Great Fire in 1834. There were 2 design plans at the beginning. One was an ancient Roman-style domed building. The designer, Mr. William Kent, said that this architectural style represented harmony and order. The other plan was Sir Charles Barry's Gothic style. Because this architectural style is mysterious and majestic, it is more suitable for the Parliament House than the slightly religious ancient Roman architectural style. So in the end, this plan was chosen. Eric did not stand there with a serious expression like the girl beside him. Instead, he leaned casually on the railing, listening to the girl's skillful introduction. He smiled and said, "Carolyn, the views I heard seem to be different from what you said." In the middle of the 19th century, London became darker and more chaotic due to various factors. Those conservative aristocrats who had a bit of a literary aura felt that the dark and strange Gothic style was more suitable for the cultural environment of London at that time. Therefore, when the Parliament House was rebuilt, they chose the Gothic style. When Carolyn Wilson heard Eric's words, she was stunned. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I beg your pardon, Mr. Williams. I don't agree with your point of view. Although there is indeed such a saying, The Parliament House is such an important building. It definitely did not come from such a ridiculous choice. This is a very serious matter. Eric looked at the girl with a smile. After Carolyn Wilson finished speaking, she raised her head and stared into Eric's eyes. Her eyes were wide open, waiting for him to continue retorting. Eric was also planning to bicker with this delicate girl when the originally gloomy sky unknowingly started to drizzle. The overall rainfall in London was not very high. However, due to the special climate, the weather was gloomy most of the time. From time to time there would be a drizzle. When the bodyguard who was hiding in the cabin saw that it was raining outside, he quickly brought an umbrella over. Eric took the umbrella and said, "Since it's raining, let's find a pier to dock. That's all for today." The bodyguard nodded and went back into the cabin. Eric held up the umbrella and sheltered the two of them under it. "Thank you, Mr. Williams," Carolyn said softly. She shrunk her neck a little shyly. In the blink of an eye, she said, But I still can't agree with your point of view just now." "Okay, I admit defeat," Eric said immediately. Not far away on the river, when they saw Eric holding up the umbrella for the girl beside him, frequent flashlights immediately flashed on the small boat not far away. Since the moment Eric got off the plane, he had been surrounded by paparazzi 24/7. More than a week had passed, and he was used to these people. However, when he looked at the girl beside him, Eric suddenly asked, "Carolyn, have you read the newspapers recently?" The girl, who had always been serious, immediately blushed. However, she still nodded honestly. "Yes, Mr. Williams. However, I won't take those words seriously." "That's good." Eric did not want to talk about the gossip fabricated by the tabloids. He watched as the yacht slowly stopped at the pier in front of them. Then Eric took Carolyn off the boat. A black Bentley business car was already parked at the side of the pier. "Carolyn, do you want me to send you back?" "Thank you, Mr. Williams. However, there's no need. I can take a taxi back. If it's possible, can you lend me an umbrella?" Eric looked at the drizzle that was getting heavier and heavier. He walked forward and personally opened the car door for the girl. "Let me send you back. There shouldn't be any taxis nearby. Don't refuse. Just treat it as an employee benefit." Carolyn Wilson hesitated for a moment. She knew that Eric lived in the Hyde Park Hotel. In fact, she also lived near Hyde Park. It was not too far away from Eric's residence. Moreover, it was not easy to find a taxi here. She thanked him again and carefully got into the car. Eric closed the door and sat on the other side. Then, he told the driver to start the car. "Where do you live?" Eric asked after the car started. "Knight Street," the girl replied. Eric nodded and gave the driver a few more instructions. The Bentley slowly made its way through the winding streets of London. The atmosphere in the car was quiet for a moment. Perhaps she felt that she had an obligation to liven up the atmosphere after hitching a ride. Carolyn Wilson quickly found a topic to talk about. "Mr. Williams, you've been touring London these days. Are you planning to shoot a movie related to London? This requires a suitable theme. However, if I really plan to shoot a movie related to London in the future, I will definitely ask you to be my consultant." How can I do that?" "I can't." Carolyn hurriedly shook her head. "However, I can introduce you to my mentor. He is a very knowledgeable person." Eric looked at the girl's serious appearance. He smiled and said, "I heard that you are a student at Cambridge?" "Yes, I studied English literature. I just graduated this year and have been admitted as a postgraduate student. After the summer break, I will continue to study." Eric nodded and said, "The female lead of my recent movie is a top student at Oxford. What about you? Are you interested in being an actress?" "I'm not interested. I don't know how to act." Carolyn shook her head again. After thinking for a while, she suddenly said, "However, I have a good friend who is very good at acting. She also studied literature. However, she established a drama club when she was in school. She is very good." Eric had just casually mentioned it. As for Carolyn's friend, he wasn't too interested. However, there was still some distance before they reached their destination. He casually said, "Very good? How good is she?" Although Carolyn felt that Eric wasn't too interested in this topic, She still answered him out of courtesy that had been cultivated since childhood. She can personally write the script. Moreover, when she was in her second year, she used the script that she wrote to win the Edinburgh Festival Student Drama Award. After saying this, Carolyn suddenly thought of something and chuckled. What's wrong? Eric lowered his head and looked at the clothes in front of him. There didn't seem to be anything wrong. No, it's not that. I mean, the comedy that she won the award for was called Small Fortune. During the performance, she had to fall down a 7-foot ladder every time. Therefore, after she won the award, she tattooed a small ladder on her body. Eric was somewhat puzzled. There didn't seem to be anything funny about this. After thinking for a while, he suddenly asked, "Then where did she tattoo it?" Carolyn's face immediately turned red. She bashfully rubbed against her seat for a while before saying, It's here." After saying that, the girl stretched out her finger and pointed at Eric's thigh. However, as if she had touched something terrifying, she immediately retracted her finger. Her face turned even redder. This time, Eric was interested in the friend that Carolyn had mentioned. He had never heard of someone who had a ladder tattooed on their buttocks. "Your friend is quite interesting. Maybe if there's a chance, you can introduce her to me." Carolyn nodded her head. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she felt that it was too abrupt and didn't open her mouth. Half an hour later, the car stopped next to an apartment near Knight Street in the southern part of Hyde Park. At this time, the rain outside had stopped. Eric dropped the girl off at the side of the road. After saying goodbye, he got the driver to drive away. Carolyn watched as the Bentley disappeared around the corner. Just as she was about to turn around and enter the apartment, she heard the familiar roar of an engine from the other side of the street. Following which, a large displacement Jaguar Monarch from the 1970s appeared in her field of vision. The Jaguar stopped beside Carolyn. A girl with wavy hair and a bohemian-style dress jumped out from the driver's seat. "Hey, Carolyn. What are you standing here for?" "It's nothing, Rachel. I just came back." Carolyn shook her head. Rachel looked at her face a few times and suddenly smiled. "Was it that director who sent you back?" Carolyn's face turned red. She wanted to deny it, but in the end, she still nodded her head lightly. The girl called Rachel gently pinched Carolyn's face and smiled. "I really don't know what to do with you. It's been so many years, but you still can't lie. You're hopeless." "I don't want to lie." Okay. Rachel helplessly shook her head. Suddenly she mischievously asked, "Then do you like that director?" I'm not telling you." Carolyn's face immediately turned red. She subconsciously reached out to cover her face with her hands. However, Rachel pulled her into her embrace. "Come, let this big sister hug you." Rachel wore small leather boots and was over 1.75 meters tall. However, the petite Carolyn was only 1.6 meters tall. Although she was hugged by this girl who was dressed in a rather unconventional way, they looked like a couple. "Rachel, don't be like this." Carolyn pushed Rachel away and frantically walked into the apartment. Rachel blindly followed her and continued to tease her. "I saw it in the newspaper. It said that you and that director are quite compatible. Don't talk nonsense." Carolyn took out her keys and opened the door. She avoided Rachel's gaze and awkwardly tried to change the topic. I even mentioned you to him." Chapter 530. Talking about me? What did he say? Did he secretly say something bad about me? Rachel asked casually as she walked into the apartment and sat beside the shoe rack at the entrance to change out of her long boots. Carolyn was wearing flat casual shoes and didn't change out of them like Rachel did. She walked straight to the sofa in the living room and sat down. When she heard Rachel's words, her face turned slightly red. She thought that it wasn't a bad thing to accidentally reveal that her good friend had a tattoo. She said, "Of course not. I only told him that you're great at acting in plays, and that you even won an award at the Edinburgh Festival. He thinks that you're quite interesting and said that if there's a chance, I'll introduce you to him." Rachel took out a pair of slippers and put them on before walking over. She smiled and asked, "Then when do you plan to introduce me to him? He's a Hollywood tycoon. If I can get to know him, I won't have to run around all day to audition for small roles. Carolyn carefully looked at Rachel and stuttered. Ah, but I think that Mr. Williams is just being polite. If he really brings you to him, it'll be too abrupt. Carolyn carefully looked at Rachel and stammered. Rachel looked at the girl's timid expression and leaned over to kiss Carolyn's cheek without hesitation. All right, I'm just joking with you. I'm not that naive. Hollywood isn't a place for small fries like us. Actually, I don't really like that Eric Williams. Some time ago, an agent from ICM came to England to select a role for a movie by Firefly. My agent finally handed over my information with great difficulty. In the end, they just said that my age wasn't suitable and didn't even give me a chance to audition before they kicked me out. Just thinking about it makes me hateful. It's rumored that the selection criteria for actors were set by Eric Williams. Carolyn listened to Rachel's indignant tone and couldn't help but say, This shouldn't have anything to do with Mr. Williams. He's a very gentlemanly person. You're just too naive. Rachel couldn't help but shake her head. Carolyn pouted and said, Of course not. I can tell what's real and what's fake. All right, I believe you. Rachel quickly surrendered when she saw the girl's eyes widen. She looked like she was going to argue with her if she didn't believe her. Carolyn looked at Rachel's careless and insincere manner and did not continue speaking. It was clear that this was not the first time this had happened between the two of them. So Rachel, how did your audition go today? I'll get it on the spot. Rachel said excitedly. It's a role in Inspector Moss. It's about 2 episodes. After I'm done with it, I'll be able to pay my rent for the next 2 months. Carolyn was a little excited for her good friend, but then she recalled the situation where she was freeloading at Rachel's place. Embarrassed, she said, Rachel, I'll help you share a portion of the rent. Let's not talk about this anymore. You should keep it for your living expenses in the future. I don't need to worry about these things. Besides, you won't be staying here for long. Once school starts, you can go to Cambridge. You have to persevere. Don't give in to your father. Rachel waved her hand and said a few words before standing up. I'll go make a pot of coffee. When it gets dark, we'll go out and eat together to celebrate getting another role. Carolyn nodded. She looked at Rachel's figure as she went into the kitchen and said with a little admiration, I really envy you. You've always been so independent. If it wasn't for my father forcing me to give up my studies and marry that boorish and pretentious guy from the Edward family, I might not have had the courage to run away from home. Rachel, who was in the kitchen, heard Carolyn's words and laughed. What's there to be envious about? At least when you get married, your father will definitely pay for the wedding expenses. My family might not be able to do so, so I can only save money and do it myself. I'm not sure either. I don't even know what I'll do in the future if I go against my father this time. I heard from Aunt Lisa that my aunt broke off from the family because she refused to listen to my grandfather's arrangements. Rachel walked out of the kitchen with a pot of coffee and said, You have an aunt? I've never heard a chatterbox like you talk about this before. I'm not a chatterbox. Carolyn immediately retorted in dissatisfaction. She realized that her rebuttal would not have any results, so she could only say, I do have an aunt, but I've never seen her before. Aunt Lisa secretly told me about her. It said that when I was born, my aunt fell in love with a very talented playwright while watching a stage play in London's West End. However, that playwright was just a commoner and came from a very poor family. My grandfather firmly disagreed and quickly arranged another blind date for her. My aunt made a big fuss at home and then moved to Greece alone. She hasn't been back for 20 years. As Rachel listened, she could not help but laugh out loud. Carolyn, are you sure this is real? Did your Aunt Lisa make this up after watching too many plays about talented men and beautiful women? Aunt Lisa is just a servant in our family. How could she have the leisure to watch stage plays? Then she must have made it up from watching too many daytime soap operas. Rachel laughed again. Carolyn was clearly shaken by this fairy tale story. However, on the surface, she refused to admit defeat. She turned her head and said, I'm ignoring you. Rachel laughed again and reached out to rub the girl's head. While the two were fooling around, the phone in the living room rang. Rachel put down the coffee and walked over to pick up the phone. After saying a few words, she covered the phone with her hand and said to the girl sitting on the sofa, "Carolyn, it's your father." Carolyn shrunk her neck. How did he know I was here? Rachel couldn't help but shake her head and sigh at her good friend's naivety. Although Carolyn's family wasn't considered illustrious in the UK, it definitely wasn't something that those declining aristocrats could compare to. Carolyn had escaped from her home, so how could her parents not care about her? On the day that the girl stayed at her place, Carolyn's mother had called her and asked her to take care of her daughter. Looking at Carolyn's worried appearance, Rachel said, "Do you want me to tell your father that you're not here?" Carolyn hesitated for a moment. She knew that since her father knew she was here, then she definitely wouldn't be able to escape. She could only reluctantly move over and take the phone from Rachel's hand. "Hello, Father. It's me." Rachel handed the phone to Carolyn. In order to not make her good friend feel too awkward, she consciously walked towards the bedroom. However, although Carolyn always spoke softly, Rachel could still faintly hear the girl's somewhat agitated voice. After 5 minutes, Rachel heard that there wasn't any movement outside. Only then did she walk out of the bedroom. Seeing Carolyn lying on the sofa with a sullen appearance, she asked, "Your father asked you to go back?" "No." Carolyn sat up again and said, "My father said that he won't force me to drop out of school anymore. However, he actually asked me to invite Mr. Williams to our house for a meal. This is really too abrupt. How could I say it out loud? If I get rejected, I'll die of embarrassment." Rachel looked at the girl's conflicted appearance as she kicked her legs. She could easily understand the ins and outs of the matter. The day after Carolyn appeared in front of Eric Williams, the resourceful UK media thoroughly investigated the girl's background. The Wilson family's beloved daughter was personally acting as a tour guide. Under other circumstances, even if it wasn't considered a family scandal, the Wilson family would definitely regard it as an extremely disgraceful action and stop it. However, after so many days, the Wilson family didn't take any action. They also didn't respond to the media's comments that Carolyn and Eric Williams were extremely compatible. Clearly, they were happy to see this happen. If Eric was just a slightly famous Hollywood director, the Wilson family might still be able to maintain their status. However, a young tycoon with billions of dollars in assets was enough for the Wilson family to put down their reservations. Looking at her friend's conflicted appearance, Rachel asked, "Then what do you plan to do?" I don't know." Carolyn shook her head. Rachel was very familiar with this good friend of hers. Looking at Carolyn's appearance, she knew that the girl also seemed to want to invite Eric Williams to her house as a guest. Therefore, she encouraged her. "Then you can directly tell him tomorrow. In any case, this is an invitation from your father. If he rejects it, it has nothing to do with you. You don't have to feel embarrassed." "Really?" Carolyn raised her head and looked at Rachel hopefully. Rachel didn't hesitate at all and nodded firmly, "Of course." "Then tomorrow, I'll tell him that my father invited him." Carolyn's face was red. "Rachel, help me think about how I should say it tomorrow so that it won't seem too abrupt." Because it was located in a high-latitude area, the days in June in London were very long. It was already 7 o'clock in the afternoon when Eric returned to the hotel. However, the sky didn't show any signs of turning dark. After eating dinner in advance, Eric returned to his room and began to deal with the emails that had accumulated for the day. The box office of the second week of Jurassic Park was released. Because of the explosion in the first week's box office, although the movie's reputation was very good, most organizations still predicted that the box office of Jurassic Park would drop by more than 40% in the second week. Even many people in Firefly held a similar view. Some people even suggested that Eric prepare to reduce the number of screens of Jurassic Park in advance. However, after the real data was released, many people's predictions were once again disappointed. The box office of Jurassic Park in the second week only dropped 37% compared to the first week, earning more than $42 million. The drop was far lower than the average 50% expected by most box office forecasting organizations. In the process of large-scale release, many Hollywood movies would experience a relatively large drop in the box office in the second week because of the explosion in the box office in the first week. The subsequent drop in the box office would stabilize at a data that was in line with the movie's quality and reputation. Since Jurassic Park avoided the drop in the box office in the second week, the drop in the box office in the next few weeks would definitely not be too high. The Internal Statistics Department of Firefly had already estimated that the box office of Jurassic Park in North America would be $500 million, which was $40 million higher than the first Star Wars. Eric originally said that the box office of Jurassic Park in North America would be about $400 million. Although the box office performance of Jurassic Park in North America exceeded his expectations, he was not sure if the movie could reach the threshold of $500 million in North America. Because when Eric planned the North American release strategy of Jurassic Park, he used a high-intensity publicity and large-scale distribution strategy that only became popular in Hollywood a few years later. This distribution method was an evolution of the saturated distribution that was currently popular in Hollywood. It was more radical than the traditional saturated distribution, but it also had a lot of disadvantages. The most important thing was that it greatly shortened the release cycle of the movie. A traditional commercial blockbuster often earned more than 80% of the box office within 4 weeks of release. According to the current box office trend of Jurassic Park, Eric was confident that Jurassic Park would earn $300 million in North America in 4 weeks. However, Eric had no idea what would happen to the box office of Jurassic Park a month later. After reading the email related to Jurassic Park, Eric began to check other emails and soon found the information he wanted, which was Arnold Schwarzenegger's Last Action Hero. As Eric had expected, due to the poor quality and the box office squeeze of Jurassic Park, the action film that Carlock Pictures had spent $80 million on only earned more than $16 million in the first weekend. It was not even as much as the first-day box office of Jurassic Park. In the original space-time, Stallone and Schwarzenegger were both hit by these two blockbusters that were released consecutively. These two famous Hollywood action movie stars could be said to have shared the same fate. They were both born in the 1940s and were both late bloomers in their 30s. More than 10 years after they became famous, they both fell in two movies that were released in the same summer. Although Arnold Schwarzenegger received more than $20 million for several sequels to the Terminator series after Last Action Hero, he no longer had the confidence to ask for a high price for his other movies. Stallone's two popular series Rambo and Rocky ended because of the declining box office, and there was no trump card to maintain his value. In the next 10 years in the original space-time, Stallone's works were barely good, and only The Expendables was completed after many years of bumpy production. Chapter 531. As early as last year, when Firefly acquired Disney, they had already publicized the True Lies project. The media had also been paying attention to the progress of this matter. As the True Lies project began to prepare, the media also paid attention to the male lead that had been missing for this project. Hollywood stars such as Mel Gibson, Harrison Ford, and Nicolas Cage were rumored to be candidates for the male lead. However, many people in the industry knew that Firefly was eyeing Arnold Schwarzenegger for the male lead. Arnold Schwarzenegger was, of course, aware of this matter. Both sides had a brief contact at the beginning of the year. At that time, Arnold Schwarzenegger's net worth was $15 million, and the other party had no intention of backing down. After that, the two sides temporarily stalled. Schwarzenegger was not in a hurry because his previous movies had done well at the box office. Arnold did not consider that Last Action Hero would fail miserably at that time. However, the other party obviously knew the value of the movie that Eric had personally selected, so they did not reject it. It seemed that they were just waiting for Firefly to take the initiative to compromise. After all, Firefly had compromised once during the box office negotiations for Terminator 2. Arnold was not in a hurry, and Firefly was of course not in a hurry either. No one knew the box office prospects of Last Action Hero better than Eric. Now that the box office of Last Action Hero was released, Eric could not even imagine how Schwarzenegger was feeling right now. Just as he was about to reply to an email to Firefly's production department, and asked them to wait for another week before restarting the salary negotiations with Arnold. The phone in the room rang. Eric picked up the phone, and a familiar voice suddenly came through the receiver. "Hi Eric, this is Jim." Eric responded with a smile. He could almost guess the purpose of Cameron's call. The two sides talked about Jurassic Park for a while, and then talked about Cameron's preparation for True Lies for a while. Cameron then talked about the purpose of his call. "Eric, you must know about the box office of Last Action Hero, right?" "Yes, more than $16 million in the first weekend. This figure is indeed a bit miserable. After the failure of 2 blockbusters in a row, I think the Germans will definitely calm down for a year or two, and will not easily throw money into Hollywood. As for MGM, I think Frank Marcoso and John Carrier will probably be replaced by Credit Lyonnais before they can warm up to their positions. Maybe MGM will enter the auction process again." Hearing that Eric was going to continue blabbering, Cameron had to fake 2 coughs and interrupted Eric. "Eric, we can talk about these things when we have time. I'm talking about the male lead of True Lies. You said that you wanted Arnold to play the role." Eric still had a smile on his face, but his tone was full of difficulty. "Jim, you were also there when we talked. You know that I was not very optimistic about the project of Last Action Hero. At that time, Arnold's salary was too high, so I wanted to wait for the movie to be released before discussing the salary with Arnold. However, I did not expect that a movie with more than $80 million would only have a box office of $16 million in the first weekend. Jurassic Park's production cost was only $75 million. According to this trend, the final box office of Last Action Hero is estimated to only be about $50 million. If this movie was only a small failure, I would not worry too much. However, Arnold fell too hard this time. In this case, his next movie will definitely be seen as a failure by Hollywood. The risk is too high." After hearing Eric's words, Cameron immediately said, "Eric, don't talk nonsense with me. Don't think that I don't know you. You must be laughing evilly right now. Arnold couldn't reach you, so he called me. $3 million. It's up to you whether you want to use it or not. Don't try to cheat me." Compared to Arnold's previous net worth of $15 million, $3 million was like a drop in the ocean. However, if it was Eric's turn, he would probably do the same. Hollywood was very cruel. The total cost of the production and distribution of Last Action Hero was more than $100 million. Based on the current situation, the parties involved in the investment and distribution could only recover about $50 million. Although it was not as tragic as the failure of Throat Island 2 years ago, this level of loss was enough to knock a Hollywood superstar into the dust. In the original space-time, Kevin Costner was unable to recover from the setback of Future Waterworld. He went from being a popular box office superstar in Hollywood to finally being reduced to playing the role of Superman's dad. Therefore, for the current Arnold, a bargain at a bargain price would give him a chance to make a comeback and squeeze into the ranks of A-list superstars again. This was very cost-effective. If he did not seize this opportunity, it was estimated that no one would ask him to act in a movie for the next 1 or 2 years. Eric was thinking about it when Cameron's urging voice came from the other side of the phone again. Eric could only say, "Yes, of course I'll use it. Jim, this time I'll give you face. $3 million it is." "Don't, I'm just a messenger. You don't have to give me face." "Okay, Jim. But you know, Firefly is my personal property. It's not like the rich German conglomerates. Spending 10 or 20 million more is like pulling out a strand of hair, so you have to take it easy this time." Cameron immediately laughed heartily. "Of course, that's not a problem. Eric, you still don't know me. I'll spend every penny on the movie." Eric cursed in his heart. It was because he knew him too well. The two unscrupulous guys did not give in to each other, and talked for a while before hanging up. Eric was about to return to his desk to continue reading the email, when the phone that he had just put down rang again. Although it was already nighttime in London, it was still afternoon work in Los Angeles. Eric was not surprised and picked up the phone again. This time, it was Stan Winston who called. His tone was anxious. Eric listened to Stan Winston's words and frowned. he said. "Stan, send me a copy of the information. I'll take a look first. If necessary, I'll rush back tomorrow morning as soon as possible." The person on the other end of the line said something else before Eric hung up. This time, the phone did not ring again. Half an hour later, Eric received an email from the digital domain. After reading for a while, Eric's eyebrows furrowed again. There was another wave of resignations in the digital domain. The last time was when Tornado was released last year. Because of the huge box office prospects of special effects movies, several major Hollywood film companies began to increase their investment in special effects and set up their own special effects departments. At the same time, because of market demand, many small special effects companies also emerged in Hollywood. It was more appropriate to call them special effects studios. However, because Hollywood still underestimated the commercial prospects of special effects movies last year, they did not spend too much to poach talent from the digital domain. The digital domain was not affected much. But this year was different. The record-breaking box office of Jurassic Park in the first week greatly stimulated the other major Hollywood film companies. In order to catch up with this development trend, this time, the digital domain could only be described as unscrupulous in their efforts to poach talent. Not only were there computer special effects artists in the digital domain, but even the software research team led by Ed Kamal was greatly affected. In the week that Eric left Los Angeles, the digital domain received more than 120 resignation applications. At first, Stan Winston thought it was a repeat of last year's situation, and did not take it to heart. He dealt with it according to his experience from last year. But in the past 2 days, more and more resignation applications were received. Stan Winston could no longer stay calm. After reading the letter, Eric's anxious mood calmed down a little. He first called his assistant to arrange a flight for him tomorrow morning. Then he silently thought about how to deal with this crisis. Obviously, with the increasing proportion of special effects movies in Hollywood, it was conceivable that with the scale of the digital domain, even if it were to double, it would be impossible to cover all of Firefly's special effects projects, let alone Hollywood's broader special effects movie market. Since he could not stop the expansion of the special effects industry, he could only choose the plan that was most beneficial to him. And Eric had considered this plan when he first established the digital domain. He just did not expect that the original plan would be implemented more than 3 years earlier than he originally expected. The night passed unknowingly as he pondered over the details of these matters. When Eric came back to his senses, it was already bright outside the window. Looking at the time, it was only 5 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, there was enough time to rest on the plane. So Eric had no intention of catching up on sleep. After washing up, he walked out of the hotel room alone and went to the restaurant to have breakfast. Because the plane would not leave until 8 o'clock in London, there was nothing to do for the time being. Eric opened today's newspaper. Hollywood's young tycoon falls in love with British aristocrat's daughter. Both intimately tour the Thames River. On the News of the World, a clear photo was published on the front page. The photo was taken yesterday afternoon when Eric was holding the umbrella for Carolyn. The paparazzi took the photo quite cleverly. It happened to be the moment when the two of them looked at each other. Eric could vaguely remember that at that time, Carolyn should have been thanking him. However, the newspaper described this situation as two people looking at each other affectionately. Eric smiled helplessly. He suddenly remembered that the News of the World was also a newspaper under the News Corporation. Moreover, it was the fuse of the famous eavesdropping scandal in the original space-time. Putting this matter aside, Eric thought of another matter. He had originally made an appointment with Carolyn to continue touring London today. Now he definitely could not continue. Eric originally wanted to let the staff of the branch company explain to the girl afterwards. However, there was nothing to do at the moment. Moreover, Carolyn's place was not too far away. Eric decided to make a trip there personally. After calling the hotel lobby manager and asking for a car, Eric instructed the driver to drive to Carolyn's place. A few minutes later, the car stopped in front of the apartment where Carolyn's film crew was staying. Eric had just gotten out of the car when he felt a flash of light nearby. Looking over in surprise, he discovered that there were paparazzi guarding the place. Eric was about to ignore them and walk into the apartment, but then he remembered that he did not know which floor Carolyn lived on. When Eric saw the paparazzi peeking their heads out, he walked over to them. When the paparazzi saw Eric walking towards him, he did not show any signs of panic. Instead, he smiled and greeted Eric. "Mr. Williams, you came to pick up Miss Wilson so early in the morning?" Eric did not answer. Instead, he asked, "Which newspaper are you from?" "The News of the World." The paparazzi did not hide anything and added, "But if there is any breaking news, of course, it will be sold to the highest bidder." Eric smiled and asked, "Do you know which room Carolyn is staying in?" "Room 203 on the second floor." The paparazzi blurted out without hesitation. Eric thanked him and turned to walk back to the apartment. The moment Eric entered the door, he heard a few soft clicking sounds. Because it was still early, Eric walked up the old stairs to the second floor without bumping into anyone. When he arrived at the door of room 203, Eric gently knocked on the door. There was no response. After knocking a few more times, a somewhat languid female voice sounded. "It's not even 7 o'clock yet. Who is it?" When Eric heard that the girl's voice was not Carolyn's, he was a little surprised. However, he still said, "Hello, miss. I'm Eric Williams. I'm looking for Miss Wilson. Can you open the door?" A somewhat surprised cry came from the door. Eric guessed that the other party was observing him through the peephole, so he did not hide. Then, the door was pulled open. A girl in light blue pajamas appeared in front of him. When Eric saw the girl's appearance, a look of surprise appeared on his face. The world was so small. "Hello, Mr. Williams. Please come in." The girl did not notice the surprise on Eric's face. She was a little flustered as she let him into the room and said, "Mr. Williams, please sit down. I'll go and wake Carolyn up. She hasn't woken up yet." "Thank you." Eric nodded and sat down on the sofa. Then, "I still don't know your name." My name is Rachel Wazy. Mr. Williams, you can call me Rachel." Eric smiled as he looked at the girl's somewhat flustered appearance. He nodded and said, "Hello, Rachel. You can also call me Eric." "That, of course, yes," Rachel said and smiled foolishly at Eric. She opened the door of a bedroom and went in. Chapter 532. Eric sat on the sofa in the living room. He first heard a soft cry from the bedroom, followed by a series of rustling sounds and whispers. After 10 minutes, the two girls neatly dressed and walked out of the bedroom, greeting Eric somewhat reservedly. Rachel was half a head taller than Carolyn, so Eric could easily tell that they were wearing different clothes. Seeing the two girls sit down on the sofa opposite him, he asked with some doubt, "You two are staying in the same bedroom?" "Yes, Mr. Williams." Carolyn nodded without any hesitation. Perhaps it was because she had just woken up, but the girl's slightly flushed face had a bit of a flirtatious look. Rachel was much more quick-witted than Carolyn, immediately adding, "Carolyn is only temporarily staying here with me. We are not, living together." Carolyn felt that Rachel's words were somewhat inexplicable. Her long eyelashes fluttered a few times before she understood. Her fair face immediately flushed red, and she stood up in a panic, wanting to run away. "Mr. Williams, I'll go get you a glass of water." Eric originally wanted to say no, but the girl's figure had already floated into the kitchen. Only Eric and Rachel were left in the living room. Eric looked around the exquisite little apartment with interest, then his gaze landed on the somewhat reserved Rachel Wazy. Regardless of whether it was his memories from his previous life or Carolyn's words yesterday, Eric knew that Rachel Wazy was definitely not an introverted girl. However, due to his current identity, as long as the majority of people had a normal EQ, they would not be able to unreservedly reveal their true nature in front of him. From a certain point of view, this was also a kind of pity. "Carolyn said that you are an actress?" Rachel's gaze had originally followed Eric, secretly looking around to see if there was anything inappropriate about her apartment. When she suddenly heard Eric's words, she hurriedly nodded. "Yes, Mr. Williams, I've been going through auditions most of the time recently. I've already obtained a small role in the 6th season of Inspector Moss." Just as Eric was about to speak, Carolyn walked out of the kitchen with a cup of steaming hot water. Eric took the glass and saw that there was still a piece of ice at the bottom of the glass that had not completely melted. He politely took a few sips before putting the glass on the coffee table in front of him. Seeing Eric put down the glass of water, Carolyn asked, "Mr. Williams, why are you here so early? Is there something you need?" Although the girl was a little naive, she was definitely not a fool. Eric must have come to find her so early in the morning for something else. "I'm going back to Los Angeles. I happen to have some time, so I came over to say goodbye." When Carolyn heard Eric's words, a trace of unconcealable sadness appeared on her face. However, she still politely replied, "In that case, Mr. Williams, I wish you a pleasant journey." Eric was stunned for a moment before he smiled and said, "Thank you." Rachel, who was sitting beside Carolyn, resisted the urge to cover her forehead with great difficulty. This little fool, what nonsense is she talking about? Seeing that Carolyn didn't know what to say next, Rachel could only open her mouth and ask, "Mr. Williams, will you still come to London?" "I might not come back in the short term." Originally, the German premiere of Jurassic Park was scheduled for the 4th of July. I could have stayed there until that date. However, something happened in Los Angeles, so I had to personally rush back to deal with it. If I come to Europe again, I might directly stay in Paris or Berlin. When Rachel heard Eric's words, the disappointment on Carolyn's body could even overflow. She looked at her good friend with some pity and suddenly mustered up the courage to say, "Mr. Williams, Carolyn will only report to Cambridge in September. If you go to Paris or London, Carolyn can still be your tour guide. She has no problem speaking French, German, or Spanish." Seeing the originally depressed girl suddenly raise her head and look at him with hope, Eric didn't have the heart to refuse. He nodded and said, "That's good. When the time comes, I'll get someone to give you a call. Carolyn, are you willing?" "And I have no problem." Carolyn nodded a few times like a chick pecking at rice. Then, she realized that her actions were too unreserved. She lowered her head with a red face. Carolyn's salary would be handled by the people at the Firefly branch. After Eric finished with this matter, he stood up and said, "In that case, I'll take my leave. The plane leaves at 8 o'clock. I have to go back and pack my luggage." The two girls stood up together with Eric. After he finished speaking, Eric looked at Rachel Wazy. He took out his personal business card from his pocket and handed it over. Under Rachel's somewhat surprised gaze, he explained, "There's a disaster romance movie in the Firefly project. They need a British female lead with a rebellious and elegant temperament. I think you can give it a try." Rachel subconsciously took the business card. When she heard Eric's first few sentences, she felt that happiness had come too suddenly. Her head was buzzing, and she didn't hear a single word that Eric said after that. Although she was born in a wealthy family and could leisurely study literature at the University of Cambridge like those aristocratic children, being an actress was just a hobby and a way to make a living. However, this didn't mean that Rachel would be indifferent to the invitation from the broader stage of Hollywood. It was just that because of her inner pride and restraint, Rachel wasn't like many people who would use unscrupulous means to curry favor with Hollywood. Otherwise, when she found out that Carolyn had gotten the job as Eric's personal tour guide, she would have thought of ways to get close to her. Eric said something and left after saying goodbye to Rachel, who was still in a daze. Carolyn wanted to send Eric all the way downstairs, but Eric thought of the paparazzi downstairs and rejected her. The girl watched as Eric's figure disappeared down the stairs. Then she turned around and closed the door. She took a few deep breaths to calm her emotions before walking up to Rachel. "Hey, Rachel." Seeing that her friend didn't answer, Carolyn playfully reached out her small hand and snatched the business card from Rachel's hand. "Hey, it's mine." Rachel immediately reacted. Carolyn threw herself on the sofa and hid the business card. She spread out her hands and said, "It's gone. Hurry up and get up. If you lose it, I'll chase you out to sleep on the streets." Rachel lifted Carolyn to the side and found the business card under the pillow. She went into the bedroom and put it away. Then she walked out and jumped in front of Carolyn. She held the girl's small face and rubbed it. "Ha ha ha, Carolyn, I'm going to Hollywood." "Hollywood?" Carolyn shook her head in dissatisfaction. Hey, you must have been distracted just now. You didn't hear what Mr. Williams said. Oh, that's right. What else did he say? He said that the movie will only start filming in about 2 years. He also hopes that you won't be too eager for quick success in the next 2 years. Instead, you should take part in more stage performances and continue to hone your acting skills. Carolyn's face was filled with schadenfreude. 2 years. Who knows, he might have forgotten about it by then. Rachel was a little confused when she heard this condition. 2 years wasn't a long time, but it wasn't short either. Since the movie was decided by Firefly 2 years in advance, it definitely wouldn't be a small matter. If she was 100% sure that she could get the role, Rachel didn't mind waiting for 2 years. However, what Eric had just said was only a verbal agreement. Although Rachel didn't think that Eric would make fun of a nobody like her, if he really forgot about it 2 years later, she could only blame herself for being unlucky. Feeling hesitant, Rachel decided to call her agent and ask for an idea. Carolyn watched as Rachel picked up the phone and called her agent. After the other party muttered a lot over the phone and hung up, the girl regretfully patted the pillow in front of her a few times. Eric left. I can't invite him on behalf of my father. At this moment, Carolyn was simply a lucky mascot in Rachel's eyes. After putting down the phone, Rachel immediately rushed over and hugged the girl. Don't worry. Didn't he just say that he'll look for you when he comes to Europe? You can invite him again when the time comes. But although I know a little about Paris, I've only been to Berlin twice. Anyway, you're a little genius with a photographic memory. You'll know everything after going to the library for a day. If you really can't do it, I can accompany you to Berlin to explore first. Then it's settled. We'll go to Berlin tomorrow. Even if you want to throw yourself at him, you don't have to be in such a hurry. I still have an audition tomorrow. I'll accompany you on the weekend. After getting off the plane from Los Angeles International Airport, Eric went straight to Firefly Studios. Michael Lynn, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Jeffrey Hansen, Frank Wales and Stan Winston, Ed Kamal, John Lasseter, who were in charge of the digital domain and Pixar, were all gathered at Firefly Studios. In addition, some of the heads of the other departments of Firefly were also there. Eric walked into the conference room and sat down in the empty seat prepared for him. He said to Stan Winston, who was on his left, Stan, reintroduce the current situation. Stan Winston nodded. His assistant secretary distributed the prepared documents to everyone present. He said, this incident probably started after the box office of Jurassic Park was released on the first weekend. Because of what happened after Tornado was released last year, I didn't take it to heart. However, we've been receiving more and more resignation letters these days. When I sent you the email, we only received 126 resignation letters. In just one day, it increased to 169. Currently, I'm holding back most of them and haven't signed them immediately. Before this incident, the fixed number of employees in the digital domain was 850. Of course, this number doesn't include the technical support team led by Ed. However, if things continue to develop, we may lose more than 30% of our employees. Chapter 533. Eric tapped the table lightly and thought for a moment, then asked, among these people, what's the ratio of model special effects artists to CG special effects artists? Stan Winston paused and said, well, I haven't gotten anyone to calculate that yet. Then do it immediately, Eric said. He watched as Stan Winston turned his head to instruct his assistant to do it immediately. Then he looked at Ed Carmel and asked, what about you guys? Ed Kamor said, my situation here is still okay. Our opponents are not too interested in the ordinary programmers of the team. They are mainly in contact with the mid-level and senior project managers of the team, although some of them have signed a non-compete agreement, and if they are forced to leave, they will not be able to engage in related work for a year. However, I think the commercial prospects of Jurassic Park are enough for our opponents to challenge the legal risks. After hearing this, Eric looked at John Lasseter. John Lasseter shrugged and said, I think everyone here has already seen the Bug Crisis movie. This 3D animated movie is not inferior to Toy Story 2 years ago. So I think, with the previous experience in the digital field, Pixar should take some precautionary measures to prevent a large number of employees from leaving. After the three of them finished talking, Eric looked at the executives present and asked, "Is there anything else to add?" Michael Lynn said, "Eric, Ryder collected some information. Let him speak." Eric nodded to a slightly plump Caucasian man in his 40s. The man said, "Mr. Williams, according to some of the information we collected, a week ago, Michael Eisner of Universal Pictures, George Lucas of Lucasfilm, and Carol Bartz, the chairman and CEO of the famous graphics software company Autodesk, had a meeting in San Rafael, where Autodesk's headquarters is located. Then, Autodesk announced that it would cooperate with Industrial Light and Magic and Universal Pictures to enter the film and television special effects software market. However, the announcement did not mention any specific details. In addition, several medium-sized special effects companies in Hollywood have recently received a large amount of funding and are recruiting. After the executive named Ryder finished speaking, the assistant who had just received Stan Winston's order pushed the door open and walked into the conference room again. He placed a set of sorted data in front of Stan Winston. "Eric, the statistics are out. Among the 169 people who submitted their resignation applications, 112 of them are model special effects artists, and 57 of them are CG special effects artists." When he reported the data, Stan Winston breathed a sigh of relief. Although he started by making model special effects, Stan was definitely not a conservative person. He had heard Eric say more than once that CG special effects were the mainstream special effects trend in Hollywood in the future. The success of CG special effects films such as Terminator 2, Tornado, and Jurassic Park proved this point. Among the employees who resigned, close to 2/3 of them were model special effects artists, and only 1/3 were CG special effects artists. In this case, things were not as bad as he thought. Everyone in the room seemed to be relieved. Eric had already guessed this possibility. Now that his guess was confirmed, the last trace of worry in his heart dissipated a lot. The reason why CG special effects artists in the digital domain did not leave in large numbers was mainly because CG special effects artists used a combination of special effects software developed by the digital domain. Currently, this software was not sold in the digital domain. Without the tools and software of the digital domain, these skilled CG special effects artists could only relearn the immature third-rate special effects software on the market. If it were not for the hard-to-refuse salary offered by the poaching company, these people would never take the risk to leave. After sorting out the ideas that he had conceived in London and on the plane yesterday, Eric clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. He said, "Okay, now let's talk about how to solve this problem. First of all, we considered cooperating with Autodesk to develop Maya, but that cooperation did not succeed. Since they were unwilling to join us, now that Autodesk has set their sights on the special effects software, it's too late for them to join us. We'll kick them out the same way they jumped in." There were a few chuckles in the conference room, but no one looked down on Autodesk. Autodesk relied on the AutoCAD industrial design software series, and had basically monopolized the industrial graphics software market. Film and television special effects software and industrial graphics software had many similarities. If Autodesk wanted to develop the corresponding film and television special effects software, it would not be too difficult. The cycle was also much shorter than the development of Maya and other tools and software in the digital domain. In the original spacetime, because of the opportunity to enter the market early, Autodesk also monopolized the film and television special effects software. At this time, if they wanted to stop Autodesk from entering the film and television special effects software industry, it was not only for the sake of the software sales interests, but more importantly, it was to ensure the digital domain's position in the film and television special effects industry. If any company only invested and did not generate profits, sooner or later, they would not be able to escape the road of closure. The technical team led by Ed Kamal was in such a situation. Under the rapid development of the digital domain, there were no disadvantages. Once the film and television special effects company entered the era of mass murder, This huge technical team that could not make profits would become a burden to the company. After Eric finished speaking, everyone in the conference room began to put forward their own suggestions. After 3 days of intensive meetings, the digital domain held a press conference at the Firefly headquarters. At this time, the box office data for the second week of Jurassic Park was released. The box office received more than $71 million, and the total box office reached $185 million. Although it was a digital domain press conference, when they learned that Eric would be attending this press conference, many of the invited reporters prepared a lot of Jurassic Park sequels. However, the information revealed at this press conference did not disappoint the reporters present. Ed Kamal, who was originally Pixar's CTO, announced to the public that Firefly would integrate the technical support teams of Pixar and the digital domain to form a separate company, Firefly Software. Firefly Software's main purpose was to provide special effects software and related film and television special effects solutions to target customers. After Ed Kamal finished speaking, more than 100 reporters in the conference room immediately began to discuss. Some of the reporters who were not well informed couldn't understand why the digital domain would do such a self-destructive move when it was at its peak. Other reporters who were very sensitive to industry news realized that this was Firefly's counterattack against the poaching of the digital domain. At first, it didn't sound logical, but even if the news of Autodesk's cooperation with Industrial Light and Magic and Universal was not revealed, some smart people could understand that this was actually a disguised expansion of the digital domain. Although the digital domain's special effects software had not yet been leaked, the technical level demonstrated in movies like Jurassic Park was miles ahead of the small and medium Hollywood special effects companies. Therefore, once the digital domain's software tools were sold, not only would the digital domain's special effects artists be given priority, but other special effects companies would also join the digital domain's software tool user camp. Moreover, Ed Kamal's speech had a very important point. Aside from the special effects software, Firefly Software would also provide special effects solutions for their clients. This measure not only increased Firefly Software's profitability, it also indirectly restricted the development of the special effects companies that were greedy for convenience through the licensing of their solutions. After all, if they could buy a set of special effects production plans at a lower price, most people wouldn't waste time and money on research and development. Firefly Software solutions would definitely rely on Firefly's own software, which once again restricted the use of other special effects software. After Ed Kamal's announcement, the conference entered a free Q&A session. Below the stage, a large number of hands raised in unison. The host looked below the stage and casually picked a female reporter with a very good temperament. Unexpectedly, when the female reporter received the microphone, she immediately turned to Eric, who hadn't spoken before. "Mr. Williams, I'm a reporter from the Los Angeles Times. The North American box office for Jurassic Park has amassed a total of $185 million. Movie fans are very interested in the follow-up story of Jurassic Park, but your original novel didn't reveal any relevant information. May I ask if Firefly will develop a sequel? First, I want to say this, lady, your question has nothing to do with this conference. If anyone else asks similar questions, I won't answer. However, I can tell you now that there will definitely be a sequel." Eric was just about to hand the microphone over when the female reporter immediately asked, "Then, Mr. Williams, will Firefly Software treat special effects companies outside of the digital domain differently?" "I don't know what kind of difference you're talking about. Firefly Software and the digital domain are originally one entity. If it's about technical support, Firefly Software will definitely spare no effort in the digital domain. This is an indisputable fact. However, in other aspects, for example, Firefly Software's special effects software is treated equally internally and externally. After the separation, even if the digital domain wants to use Firefly Software's latest software, they will still have to pay according to the process." The microphone was quickly passed to another reporter, and the other person's question was still directed at Eric. "Mr. Williams, I'm a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle. May I ask if Firefly Software will be listed? Currently, there's no listing plan, but there will definitely be one in the future." The reporter immediately seized the opportunity and asked a question that everyone on Wall Street was very concerned about. Then will Firefly Pictures be listed? That you're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.